From ABC News, this is One-on-One with Greg Jackson and his guest, Maya Angelou.
She was raped at only 7 years old, and later, as a teenager, worked briefly in a whorehouse to support a son. But she went on to become a performer, a poet, and a writer of remarkable books about her struggles. Our guest, Maya Angelou. Earlier, she told us about growing up in a small southern town, about being raped at the age of 7, and later as a teenager working briefly in a brothel. But she went on to become a performer, a poet, and a world-famous writer. How did she do it? We go on with our conversation.
Billie Holiday told me that I was going to be famous. She said I wouldn't be famous for singing, which was obvious. But she said, you're going to be famous, but remember, you can't get so high, somebody won't try to bring you down. So, what my great aspiration, my greatest ambition, is to be so good. Now, in that way, I'm tiresome, as I suppose, to live with, because I want to be a fantastic human being. But let me come back to a question you asked about getting over a rape. No one ever, as far as I know.
I hope it didn't sound that foolish. I didn't mean to say you get over it.
I know what you mean.
Okay.
I do know what you mean. And many people who have not gone through it, even if someone in their families have had this violation, they cannot know how desolate the affront leaves the victim. Absolutely desolate. And now, at this age, which is what the French call a certain age,
your current age.
My current age. I am, I suppose, the most read black female writer in the world. My books are required reading at every university or college in this country. I speak 7 languages. I'm a Chubb Fellow at Yale University. And I think at present I have about 17 honorary doctorates. I have the Reynolds Chair at Wake Forest University.
As a professor?
I'm a professor at Wake Forest.
Which, ironically enough, is in the South.
Yes, good.
Go on.
With all that, saying that, and I'm financially secure, saying that there isn't one day of my life that I haven't thought about it. Not one. I have had to use an incredible amount of energy to keep balance in my life. Incredible amount. If I hadn't had to do that, I might have written 10 more books or 5 more films. I don't know. So, okay, next. Go on. Next question.
It's such a leap to be fluent in 7 languages, to be a university professor, to be the most widely read black woman writer in the world. And at this point, I suppose we're asking, God, how'd she do it?
When I've told you I hadn't stopped reading, I think that is...
Well, lots of people keep reading. So, what?
Now, wait, you're not listening. When one reads, if you do, you can truly begin the process of educating yourself, not just about the who's and where's and at what time and the sites, but really to understand who one is. That is the value.
I suppose we're so accomplishment-oriented. One has to make that first step, but where you said, I am not anybody's lackey. I am Maya, who is going to go on to what you've accomplished.
Well, I didn't think that. I thought I was going to become a very successful real estate broker. I really did. I wanted to have a suit, gabardine, snakeskin shoes, a snakeskin purse, light beige or white gloves, which you never really put on, you just sort of held them, and a briefcase. I hadn't the faintest idea of real estate, but I saw myself as this executive.
You said something else once, that one needs noble heroes. Was that your grandmother?
Heroes and sheroes.
And sheroes.
Yes.
Was that your grandmother?
Yes, my grandmother.
Can one succeed without?
I don't know. I don't know if the hero or shero has to be a human being. It can be a great idea. It can be a gesture. It can be a literature, which is a hero, shero. It can be music. It can be art, painting.
There must be the other side of you. We've seen the highly accomplished and one who overcame obvious setbacks.
Still am overcoming.
On the other hand, my instincts would tell me you'd be a tough person to live with. I think, I suspect that your strong-willed would be an understatement.
I don't think so. I don't think...
How many husbands have you had?
Enough for the time being.
Is there going to be more?
Are you asking?
Well, I don't mean to be cheeky, but
I mean...
I guess I am.
Oh, I see. Are you asking me directly?
I guess I was asking not just voyeuristically, but how it would affect... Can one live like yourself? Your book in Cage Birds, you always describe as Negro. You don't say black.
Well, but that was talking about a time when Negro was fashionable. We have gone through many many titles. Negro, colored, Afro-American, So I was writing about a time when black people were called Negroes.
But when you think of Mrs. Flowers, black. Isn't it curious that our discussion revolves so much around white and black? You named all of those degrees of color but in fact, in terms of accomplishment, it doesn't have anything to do with it. If it isn't the mind and there's no talent, nothing means anything.
Well, I tell you, if you take two people, if they both start at the same place and elevate, ascend, then you can say, that's all the same thing. But if you take a person who has been here and one who has started here, there's a difference. There's a world of difference, because you think to yourself, listen, had you come from as far as I've come, you should be president of the world, my dear.
I'm not so sure you're not going to be.
No. You see what I mean, though? That's what makes one has to see the relative
You're saying
progress.
Down there you're female, you're black, and from the rural South.
That's right.
Can't start much lower, is that what you're saying?
It's hard to, I might have been Spanish speaking.
Is there the slightest possibility? The white folks, myself, can truly understand the black experience.
Oh, I think to the degree that it's necessary to understand.
Well, you once said that black folks should play white folks in plays and what, because you've been studying white folks for hundreds of years.
Yes.
But that the white folks don't understand,
Very seldom I've had to. You see, it's like the Cockneys in Britain, in England in particular. The aristocrats and the upper class and the upper middle class controlled so much of life that the Cockney developed a way of watching that person and can imitate him to a fine degree. One has only to see the current, look at Finney or some of the current English actors who can imitate the upper class and upper middle class to a degree so finely honed that they can put it over. For blacks in this country, for centuries, the wave of a white woman's hand might reveal that she is getting ready to sell one's children. Or a frown on a white man's face could mean in a moment you're about to be flogged. So people learn to watch.
There's a poem about facing always with a grin.
Oh, when I think about myself.
Is that the story of the blacks? The face that...
Well, people laughed, had to learn to laugh when they weren't tickled and to scratch when they didn't itch.
Black folks did.
Black folks did.
Have you ever considered, this may just sound ludicrously simple, but why do white folks, where you grew up, how could they and why would they hate somebody like your grandmother? Why would they hate black people?
Because they're frightened.
Why? You didn't have guns.
I know. But people are afraid, for one thing, that basically, people are afraid to die. That is basic. I'm coming to it. Let me explain. Basically, people are afraid to die. So they clutch to something which they think will preserve their lives. So they try to guarantee happiness to themselves by shunting dirt and misery off on someone else. That's Sterling Brown. Sterling Brown's poem, The Strong Men. People feel, if I can keep them out of this building, them off this street, them out of this employment line, I'll live a little longer. They don't think it consciously, but that is fundamental. People are afraid to be pried loose from their ignorance because they know their ignorance so well, they know it better than they know their body odors. And if you say, come on, give up your ignorance, they get into that terrible position, terrifying position which Shakespeare talks about at the end of the soliloquy, Hamlet's soliloquy. They'd rather bear the ills they have than fly to others that they know not of. Thus conscience doth make cowards of us all. So they are cowardly.
Still learning. Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Gus T, Renegade, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the global system of white supremacy, racism. This broadcast for non-white people, victims of white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, February 6, 2025. So I have been told this is our 7th and penultimate session on Dr. Maya Angelou's The Heart of a Woman. We're picking up on chapter 15. We should be wrapping this book up next week. The audio segment that we heard at the beginning, that was the 1983 interview that Dr. Angelou conducted with suspected racist Greg Jackson on the program One on One, and they opened talking about Dr. Angelou being a victim of rape, and I thought it was so powerful, her just being public and talking about how difficult, when they, kind of put that phrase out and say, I'm a rape survivor, and she just, wow, to say, I have had to exert so much time and energy dealing with being a rape victim, and this was years after the fact, where she said, man, I could have, maybe written 10 books, 10 additional books, maybe 20 additional books, who knows, and additional films and all this if I didn't have to use all of this time and energy compensating for being a victim of rape. Wow. And so from there, we talked about that last week as well, right? From there, and that's not even an edit. I didn't, do anything to cut it that way. Naturally, in their conversation, Mr. Jackson, Dr. Angelou, their conversation segued from being a victim of rape and the effort to deal with that for the duration of her life. The power of reading. Whew. Reading is more important than watching television, even documentaries, for sure. This white man, suspected racist Greg Jackson, there were so many tacky moments in the interview, and generally that's always the case with a white person. This isn't as bad as Terry Gross talking about now, Buddy was about to rape you at the UN ride, wasn't he? I know he was about to rape you. It's not quite that bad, but it's still really, really tacky, probably racist, saying, you just seem like you'd be a really tough person to live with. What? To what? I cannot imagine talking to an accomplished, best-selling author, professor, actor. She was in Roots, Poetic Justice. And I don't know. I can't even think of who would a comparable white person of that ilk be. But Woody Allen talking to Woody, you just seem like you'd be a difficult person to live with, especially if you're a young child. I can't imagine. Then they go from that to getting into, we're going to talk about racism, white supremacy now. And he says, wait a minute, before he says, how many husbands have you had? Like, that's what I mean. Like, it was so tacky. Like, he was talking to a white woman. How many husbands exactly have you had? How many more times you go to get all up in your bedroom? And and we just talked about all of the sexual trauma that I've had. And then, how many more times you gonna get me? I mean, what is the deal? Are you serious? I just thought that was so tacky, and I thought she exerted so much black self-respect in her retort. Are you asking me directly? Hop back in the question land. He backed down. He did all that stammering and stuttering, and I did edit there because he totally pivoted out, and he went to, well, your mom says that you are obsessive about writing, and she talked about her writing process. That's way different than how many times you're going to get married, how many husbands you have. See? Now, if it's a time and energy thing, he didn't even get into that, but it was so tacky. Anyway, then they get into the racism thing, and he says, this is a white man, do you think it is possible for white people to ever truly understand being Negro? They still ask that now. That interview was in 1983. White people still put that question forward today, 2025. That's how tacky and little progress that we have made in getting this here problem solved. And then this came up in the book last week. Out of that same thinking, erroneous, illogical thinking, that this problem is somehow connected to white people are ignorant about black people or ignorant about what it means to be a victim of racism, that black people are experts about white people. Can I make sure I include, full or say, the most familiar mystery? White people. Fuller didn't say, man, black people know white people like the back of our hand. No, he didn't say that. He said white people are the most familiar mystery. That is sadly still the case. 2025. And I thought it was telling when Dr. Angelou, in my view, Victims Guaranteed Qualified, when she began talking about how informed black people are, we have to be informed about white people in order to live, she did not cite current examples. That was a 1983 interview. She cited examples of black people having to know about the flip of a white woman's hand, meaning my children are going to be sold. That is not happening in 1983. She did not cite any. Give us some examples from this century about that illustrate how super informed black people are about what it means to be white. Music even dropped out there. Thank you, Abby Lincoln and Max Roach. Like, please, 2025, Black History Month 2025. Give me the illustration that black people are super informed about what it means to be classified as white. Please. And then we get more tackiness. He says the white man, Greg Jackson, suspected racist. A white man, asks Dr. Angelou why white people are afraid of black people. Now that's not quite Terry Gross, but it's close. Woo! You see me? I got that. Thank you. But I mean, come on. Why does a white person need to pretend that I'm ignorant? I don't know why us white people is afraid, so-called, of the Negroes. Please, come on. And I don't even think that's the case, unless we're talking about white genetic annihilation. But none of that, I mean, please, none of that makes, please. And then we pivot from that, we get from that right back into the illogic of white people is ignorant, and that is why we have racism. They don't want to be pried loose from their ignorance, and in fact, that same logic is promoted today. Jane Elliott literally has t-shirts. Admitted racist Jane Elliott has t-shirts that say, racism is an emotional commitment to ignorance, and that's how she talks about white people. Admitted racist, there you go. That's her practicing racism, white supremacy right there. But no, white people are not, you cannot be ignorant. When Oprah Winfrey did that book club on this book in the 90s, and 1 million copies of this book were sold, who you think was reading this book? Leroy? Hey, even back up off, we know Leroy is illiterate and looting and raping, so we know Leroy didn't read it. Lakeisha? Let's ask this. How many black females participating in the book club, how many of you all read this book or even knew of this book before we got to it? If anybody is ignorant about racism, Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy, Still Learning, audio segment 1.
Chapter 15. Our plane landed at Cairo on a clear afternoon, and just beyond the windows, the Sahara was a rippling beige sea which had no shore. Guy and I went through customs, each peering through a frosted glass for a sight of views. Barefoot men in long soiled nightdresses walked beside us, talking Arabic, asking questions. When we shook our heads and shrugged our shoulders, gesturing our lack of understanding, they fell about laughing, slapping their sides and doubling over. Laughter in a strange language has an unsettling effect. Guy and I walked close together, shoulders touching, into the main terminal. The room was cavernous and nearly empty, and Vuz was not there. A porter asked in his version of English if we wanted a taxi. I shook my head. I had money, nearly $1,000 in traveler's checks, but I wasn't about to get into a taxi in an unknown country. Then I realized with a numbing shock that I had no address. I couldn't take a taxi if I wanted it. I thought about Guy and caught the gas before it could surface. Mom, what are we going to do? You gave Dad the arrival time, didn't you? Of course. We'll just go over there and sit down. I didn't comment on the accusation in his voice, but I recorded it. We had lugged our baggage through a group of laughing porters and janitors when 2 black men in neat Western suits approached. Sister Maya? Sister Make? I nodded, too relieved to speak. Welcome to Cairo. And Guy? Welcome. We shook hands and they mentioned their multisyllabic names. Vuz was in a meeting with a high official and would join us as soon as possible. He had asked them to pick us up and bring us to his office. They helped us into a ramshackle Mercedes-Benz as if they were placing royalty in a state carriage. My son and I rose to the occasion. Neither of us said a word when, on the outskirts of Cairo, the driver neatly swerved to avoid hitting a camel, although I did push my elbow into Guy's side as we passed the beautiful white villas of Heliopolis. The shiny European cars, large horned cows, careening taxis, and the throngs of pedestrians, goats, mules, camels, the occasional limousine, and the incredible scatter of children made the streets a visual and a tonal symphony of chaos. When we entered the center of Cairo, the avenues burst wide open with such a force of color, people, action, and smells I was stripped of cool composure. I touched the man in the front passenger seat and shouted at him, "What's going on? Is today a holiday?" He looked out the open windows and turned back to me shaking his head. "The crowd? You mean the crowd?" I nodded. "No." He smiled. "This is just everyday Cairo." Guy was so happy, he laughed aloud. I looked at the scene and wondered how we were going to enjoy living in a year-long Mardi Gras. Emaciated men in long tattered robes ailed and ranted at heavily burdened mules. Sleek limousines rode through the droppings of camels that waved their wide behinds casually as they sashayed in the shadow of skyscrapers. Well-dressed women in pairs, or accompanied by men, took no notice of their sisters, covered from head to toe in voluminous heavy black wraps. Children ran everywhere, shouting under the wheels of rickety carts, dodging the tires of careening taxis. Street vendors held up their wares, beckoning to passers-by. Young boys offer fresh fruit drinks, and on street corners, men stooped over food cooking on open grills. Scents of spices, manure, gasoline exhaust, flowers, and body sweat made the air in the car nearly visible. After what seemed to be hours, we drove into a quiet, by comparison, neighborhood. Our escorts parked the car, then led us through a carefully tended front garden and into a whitewashed office building. They placed our luggage by the door of the lobby, then shook hands with Guy and me, and assuring us that Vooz would arrive soon, left us in the lobby. Africans came and went, nodding to us in passing. Just as exhaustion began to claim my body, Vooz entered through the open doors. He shouted when he saw us and came rushing to hold me and Guy in his arms. He grinned freely and he looked about 10 years old. I had no doubt for the moment that we were going to make each other frivolously happy. Cairo was going to be the setting for two contemporary lovers. Vooz released me and hugged Guy, chuckling all the while. He was a sexy brown-skinned Santa Claus whose love and largesse were for us alone. "Come, let's go home. We live across the street." I spoke to Guy and pointed to the luggage. Vooz shook his head and said, "They will be brought to us." We walked through the garden, arm's length, and headed for number 5 Ahmet Hishmat. Vooz led us up the stairs of the large marble-fronted building. On the steps, a black man dressed in dirty clothes grinned and bowed. "Welcome, Mr. Make." Vooz put some coins in the man's outstretched hand and spoke to him in Arabic. As we walked into the building's cool, dark corridor, Vooz told us the man was Abu, the Bobab or doorman, and he would deliver our bags. At the end of the corridor, he unlocked a carved door and we entered a luxurious living room. A gold and red striped satin sofa was the object which caught and held my attention. A muted tapestry hung on the wall above another rich-looking sofa. In the middle of the room, a low table of exquisite parquetry rested on an antique oriental rug. Vooz wondered aloud if I liked the room, and Guy made approving sounds, but I couldn't imagine how a landlord could leave such important and expensive pieces in a rented apartment. Guy shouted from a distance, "You should see this, Mom." Vooz took my elbow and directed me into the next room, where a Louis XV brocaded sofa and chairs rested on another rich rug. The dining room was filled with French antique furniture. The large bedrooms held outsized beds, armoires, dressing tables, and more oriental rugs. I grinned because I didn't know what else to do. When we reached the empty kitchen, a little sense returned to me. A soot-encrusted lamp sat on a ledge with stacked plates, a pile of cheap cutlery, and thick glasses. Vooz coughed, embarrassed. They use this, indicating the lamp, to cook on. It's a sterno stove. I didn't get around to fixing up the kitchen yet. Anyway, regular stoves are very, very expensive. I thought I'd wait until you arrived. You mean we own all that crap? I must have shouted because Guy, who was crowded into the small room with us, frowned at me, and V.O.S gave me a haughty, angry look. I have tried to make a beautiful house for you, even to the point of ignoring my own work. Yes, I've postponed important PAC affairs to decorate this apartment, and you call it crap? He turned and walked through the door. Guy shook his head, disgusted with my lack of gratitude and grace, and followed V.O.S out of the kitchen. Their silent departure succeeded in humbling me. V.O.S was a generous man. Indeed, I had only seen that kind of furniture in slick magazine advertisements or in the homes of white movie stars. My husband was lifting me and my son into a rarefied atmosphere, and instead of thanking him for the elevation, I had been sour and unappreciated. A profound sense of worthlessness had made me pull away from owning good things, expensive furniture, rare rugs. That was exactly how white folks wanted me to feel. I was black, so obviously I didn't deserve to have armoires shiny with good French veneer or tapestries where mounted warriors waged their ancient battles in silk thread. No, I decided to crush that feeling of unworthiness. I deserved everything beautiful, and I merited putting my long black feet on oriental carpets as much as Lady Astor. If V.O.S thought he wanted his wife to live beautifully, he was no less a man, and I had to get that under the layers of inferiority in my brain than a Rockefeller or a Kennedy. The luggage had been placed in the middle of the oar of the first living room. I heard V.O.S.'s and Guy's voices from the balcony, so I went to join them with a smile warm enough to melt the snows on Mount Everest. This is the most gorgeous house I've ever seen. V.O.S nodded and smiled at me as if I were a recalcitrant child who had recovered her good manners following a foolish tantrum. Guy grinned. He had known his mother would come through. We stood looking down on the back of a man who was bent weeding what V.O.S said was our private garden. We had a doorman and our own gardener. That information was a fair-sized lump, but I swallowed it. The first weeks in Cairo were occupied with introductions to freedom fighters from Uganda, Kenya, Tanganyika, North and South Rhodesia, Basutoland, and Swaziland. Diplomats from already independent African countries dropped by our apartment to meet V.O.S Makes American wife, who was trying to be all things to everybody. Jaramin from the Ethiopian embassy and his wife, Kebedicher Dachu, came early and stayed late. Joseph Williamson, the Chargdares from Liberia, and his wife, Abi, invited us to the residency. I was the heroine in a novel teeming with bejeweled women, handsome men, intrigue, international spies, and danger. Opulent fabrics, exotic perfumes, and the service of personal servants threatened to tear from my mind every memory of growing up in America as a second-class citizen. V.O.S, Guy, and I had lunch near the Pyramid of Giza, where we watched camel riders lope around the bottom of the Sphinx. Car radios, nearly turned to their highest pitch, released the moaning Arabic music into the dusty air. I had hired Nadia, a short, stubby older woman from Sudan, as cook housekeeper after V.O.S said my reluctance to have a servant in the house was not proof of a democratic spirit, but rather of a bourgeois snobism, which kept a good job from a needy worker. Anyway, she was a cook and knew how to manage the little sterno lamp which remained my only stove. Guy was enrolled in the American College at Mahdi and was picked up daily in a bus for the 15-mile ride out of Cairo to his school. He might have felt the need to show off for his schoolmates and new teachers, or the abrupt cultural change may have prompted him, but whatever the reason or reasons, he did extremely well in his studies. There was no need to urge him to do his homework, and the mood which had visited him in the more recent months in New York and San Francisco was dispelled. In Cairo, he had a clarity, was cheerful, garrulous, and my young son again. We engaged each other in a contest to see who would have the largest Arabic vocabulary and speak with the best accent. There was an Afro-Asian Solidarity Conference in downtown Cairo, and V.O.S thought I'd like to attend. The sight of the huge auditorium made me catch my breath. Long tables, banked at an easy incline, held headsets and microphones, and men of every color, wearing various national outfits, wandered the aisles, conversing loudly in many languages strange to my ear. The arrangement of seats, the microphones, and the multinationals reminded me of the General Assembly of the United Nations. My heart thumped, and I reached for Vuz, who, hating public displays of attachment unless he initiated them, stepped away, but stayed close enough to whisper. "They don't make you nervous, do they?" I straightened myself and pulled as far from him as he had withdrawn from me. "Not at all. I don't frighten easily." That was more mouth than truth, but I put my head up and walked down into the mingle of men. Vuz caught my arm and stopped me. "I want to introduce you to your fellow countrymen." I looked around to see a thin young man, dressed in a well-cut suit, smiling at me. He was of one piece. His eyes were almond-shaped, his face long and gently molded into an oval, his smile was long and thin, and he was the color of a slightly toasted almond. Vuz said, "This is David Du Bois. He is a journalist in Cairo and my very good friend. David, meet my wife, Maya." His os words were a healing balm spread on an ache I had not distinguished. "Hello, my Angelou mate. I've heard about you. All Egypt will be happy to welcome you. And they say you can sing too." The voice of an adult American black man has undeniable textures. It has a quality of gloss, slithery as polished onyx, or it can be nubby and notched with harshness. The voice can be sonorous as a bass solo or light and lyrical as a uke. When a black man speaks in that tone, it is not only intentional but instructional to the listener. I had forgotten how much I loved those sweet cadences. I said, "I surely want to thank you. I'm glad to be here." We smiled at each other and embraced. Maybe he had missed hearing a black American woman's voice. The cocktail parties at home increased. Vuz had to make contacts, and he also had to entertain them, their wives and friends. When he was in Cairo, the house throbbed with activity. I learned to cook elaborate dinners without pork and served chilled fruity unalcoholic punches when our guests were Muslim. Roast hams, rice with ham, spinach with salt pork, and peas with pig knuckles with scotch and gin were served to African and European guests. I began to notice the undeniable link between Vuz's journeys and our entertainment schedule. When he returned from Algeria, which was independent and militantly anti-colonial, his spirits were high and he strutted through the house with an air of insouciance. At those times, he wanted to be alone with me and Guy. He would describe the successful Algerian Revolution as if the 7.5-year rebellion had taken place in South Africa rather than at the continent's most northerly tip. Guy would listen, his eyes gleaming, his face immobile, as Vuz told us proudly of his conversations with Ben Bella or Boumediene. Trips to Ghana also resulted in proud reports of the Nkrumah government and homey conversations. We three would play Scrabble and listen to music. Then in our dim bedroom, he would take me into his arms delicately. My body was the prayer wheel where he placed all his supplications. Love-making became a high celebration, rich and sacred, a sacramental communion. Conversely, when he had traveled into southern Africa without passports or documents, when he doffed the tailored suits and handmade shoes, and wore the open sandals and blankets of tribesmen in order to reach a stranded party of escapees, he returned to Cairo quickened, tense with wakefulness. The whites of his eyes were always shot with red lines, and his attention was abstracted with what he had seen and where he had been. He was hardly in the house before he would pick up the telephone. "Are you free this evening? Come over. My wife will cook her famous Afro-American food. We'll drink and eat. Come." The invitation would be repeated several times before he would ask if I had something I could prepare in a hurry. Invitees would troop into the apartment, eat and drink, copiously talk loudly with each other and leave. Occasionally during the gatherings, David Du Bois and I would find a quiet corner and talk about our folks back home. David's journalistic assignments involved all of Europe, Africa, and Asia, and marriage had broadened my interests to include the mercurial politics of those areas as well. However, while the conversations around us swelled with concern over Goa and India, Sham and the Belgian-owned Union Mini Ray, the Lebanon and Middle East crisis, we wondered how the black parents in America could let their little children walk between rows of cursing, spitting white women and men en route to school. What would happen to the children's minds when uninformed police sick dogs on them just because they wanted to get to class? At a certain point, we always stopped the self-pitying and reassured ourselves that our people would survive. Look what we had done already. David and I would begin to hum softly one of the old spirituals. He always insisted on starting with his favorite. Glory, glory, hallelujah, when I lay my burden down. Surely exhibitionism was a part of our decision to sing in a room of talkers, but a deeper motivation was also present. The lyrics and melody had the power to transport us back into a womb-like familiarity. Admittedly, Africa was our place of genesis, long, long ago, but more recent and more dearly known were the sounds of Black America. When David and I lifted the song, diplomats and politicians, women on the make, and men on the run, freeloaders and revolutionaries, stopped haranguing, flirting, jibbing, imploring, pontificating, explaining, and turned to listen. First half-heartedly, informed by the knowledge that we were airing melodies written by the last large group of people enslaved on the planet, courtesy forced them to attend. After a few verses, the music made its own demands. They could not remain ignorant of its remarkable humanity. I could not read their minds, but their faces were wide open with allegiance to our songs. Vus, conscious of their attentiveness, paid tribute to our survival and by joining in helped David and me to reestablish for ourselves a connection to a bitter, beautiful past. Chapter 16. Omonadia came to the balcony on a lovely summer afternoon. Madam, I had arisen from a nap in the cool bedroom. I felt refreshed and indulgent. Yes, Omonadia? She could not have the rest of the day, if that was what she wanted. I needed a little more pampering. Madam, I stopped the rug man again. You were sleeping. What rug man? I was awake, but slow. The man collecting for the rugs. He hasn't been paid for 2 months. And the 2 furniture collectors. She laughed roguishly. The other maids down the street tell me when they're on Ahmed Hishmat, so I don't open the door. Because of her age and sharp tongue, Omonadia was the bane and the pet of shopkeepers, younger servants, and doormen. She knew all the gossip and most of the facts concerning people in our neighborhood. Omonadia, how much do we owe? She tried to keep a straight face, but her eyes danced. How much, madam? But Mr. Make would not like me to say. He is the man, madam. How much, Omonadia? She made her fingers an abacus. We had only paid 1/10 of the price on the rugs. We owed over half the cost of the bedroom furniture. We had not paid anything on the embroidered bed linens or towels. The 2 living rooms and the dining room set were way overdue for payment, and our rent was 2 months in arrears. I thanked her and told her to take the rest of the afternoon off. The specter of the New York City deputy Sherry stood in the doorway hid just behind the heavy drapes, waited nearly visible in my well-tended flower garden. Eviction in New York was bad, but at least I was at home, where my friends would have helped if I called on them. And always there was Mom. I could have gathered my son and owned back to San Francisco. But if we were thrown out into the streets of Cairo, along with the other homeless waifs, whom could I ask for help? When I was young, poor, and destitute, I had resisted welfare in the U.S. I certainly wasn't about to ask for assistance in a country which was having trouble feeding its own nationals. I had to get a job. David answered his telephone, and when I said I had an emergency, he agreed to meet me at a tea room in downtown Cairo. The restaurant was luminous with crystal chandeliers, polished mahogany counters, and jeweled women drinking Turkish coffee from dainty china cups. It was the wrong setting for my pitiable tale. David had chosen a table in the center of glitter, and when he held out a chair for me, I decided to lie, to tell him the emergency was contrived, that I just wanted a chance to get out of the house, or that I was planning a banquet and couldn't decide on a menu. He ordered whiskey and I prattled about embassy parties and dinner near the pyramids and how well I was learning Arabic and how God was settling down in his new school. I noticed he hadn't smiled once. When I finally stopped chattering, he asked quietly, "The emergency. What is the emergency?" "Nothing really." We had had no time to build a friendship. I was about to use him simply because we were both Black Americans. My mother saying, "We're colored, but we're not cousins," echoed in my mind. I shouldn't presume that our uniqueness gave me license to ask him for a favor. "Does it have to do with VOOS?" He looked at me directly and I thought, doesn't everything have to do with VOOS? I said, "I'm getting a little bored sitting at home. I've worked all my life. So really, I thought maybe you might know how I could get a job. Just to have something to do." He relaxed and grinned. "You want a job? Nice women don't work in Cairo. I thought you knew that. Why don't you join one of the women's organizations? Or set up a club among the wives of African diplomats? You could write some articles for Black American newspapers. The Amsterdam News or something. Nothing to do?" He laughed. "Girl, I thought you were serious." I was more than serious. I was desperate. And putting on silly airs, I had appeared to David like the frivolous women I scorned. "David, I'm broke. Every piece of furniture in that house was bought on installment. The rent is past due, and Guy's school fees are in arrears. I don't have enough money to go back home, and I can't stay here unless I get a job." The smile faded from his face, and he nodded. Okay. I figured it was something like that. Maybe I can get something for you. I'll do what I can. What about VOOS? Will he let you work? If I can get a job, I'll handle the rest of it. I've been through too much to turn back now. I've been a fry cook, a waitress, a strip dancer, a fundraiser. I had a job once taking the paint on cars with my hands. And that's just part of it. David shook his head. "Black women. Huh. Okay, let's have another drink. I'll call somebody I know this afternoon." I left the restaurant emboldened by alcohol and a lot of boastful conversation, and I felt as secure as the care for women still pointing honey-filled baklavis into their red mouths. 2 days later, David took me to meet Zian Nagati, president of the Middle East Feature News Agency. Dr. Nagati was a very large, handsome man in rumpled tweeds who had the air of a university professor. He spoke rapidly, never repeating himself, as if he was used to talking to efficient shorthand secretaries. He had started a magazine called The Arab Observer. It was not strictly speaking an official organ of the Egyptian government. That is, it did not come directly under the heading of the Ministry of Information. Its editorial position, however, would be identical with the national politics. He was hiring a Hungarian layout artist and already had 12 reporters working. Du Bois said I was an experienced journalist, wife of a freedom fighter and an expert administrator. Would I be interested in the job of associate editor? If so, I should realize that since I was neither Egyptian, Arab, nor Muslim, and since I would be the only woman working in the office, things would not be easy. He mentioned a salary that sounded like pots of gold to my ears, and standing, he reached for my hand. "Very good, Mrs. Make. You'll begin on Monday. I'll be there to introduce you, and Du Bois can show you around. Salam." He picked up his briefcase, inclined his head to me, shook hands with David, and left the room. I wanted to speak, but I felt I had fallen into a deep trench with steep, muddy sides. When I regained a degree of consciousness, David was talking. "You won't find it that hard. I'll help. Call me at any time. You've done reporting and you've run offices. Anyway, you wanted a job." He offered to show me his office, which was in the same building, and then take me to lunch. I followed him meekly, but I don't remember seeing his desk or meeting any other person. We went to the Cairo Hilton, but I could have eaten air sandwiches and a salad made of clouds. My thoughts nibbled on David's exaggerations to Dr. Nagati based on the lies I had told him. And the larger chunk in my throat which prevented me from swallowing solid food consisted of wondering what cleverness I could devise which would allow me to tell vooz and keep both the job and my husband. David dropped me at Ahmed Hizmet and patted me on the shoulder. Girl, you realize you and I are the only black Americans working in the news media in the Middle East? I gave him a phony smile and got out of the taxi with that new mind full of responsibility. In the United States, when I faced any new situation, I knew what to do. I had half-educated myself by spending nights and long days in libraries. I had given my son a fair smattering of general information from borrowed books. But in Egypt, I faced the dilemma without help. Only the American embassy would have a collection in English, and since I had spoken so harshly to Africans about the United States racist policy, going there was out of the question. I fingered the books vooz and I had brought from the States. George Padmore's Africa and World Peace, Du Bois's Souls of Black Folks, collections of Langston Hughes's and Paul Laurence Dunbar's poems, and Baldwin's Nobody Knows My Name. The Baldwin book gave me heart. Nobody seemed to know my name either. I had been called everything from Marguerite, Ritty, Rita, Maya, Sugar, Bitch, Whore, Madam, Girl, and Wife. Now in Egypt, I was going to be called Associate Editor. And I would earn the title if I had to work like a slave. Well, not quite, but nearly. Guy brought home another notice for FEs from school, and I told him I had made arrangements to pay. The evidence of his complete trust was the fact that the question on his face disappeared in seconds. Vooz returned on Sunday morning, rested and handsome. He was the only person I ever knew who could finish a 10-hour plane trip looking as fresh as new money. We exclaimed over our gifts. He brought a Zulu necklace for me and a chess set for Guy. We had a large Sunday dinner and got left for the movies with some school friends. We spent a lovely hour in the bedroom, reacquainting our bodies, and then I brought hot tea and cakes to the living room. Vooz joined me in his robe and slippers. I began cautiously. I saw David Du Bois. We went to tea. Oh, great. How is he? I asked him to help me find a job. Vooz sputtered, then rubbed his mouth with a napkin. His next reaction startled me. He began to laugh. At first, a few chuckles, but they increased to a hearty guffaw. Then he lost his breath again. When he calmed down, his first words were, "You black women, who knows what to do with you?" His laughter was more restrained. Black and American. You think you can come to Egypt and just go get a job? That's foolish. It shows the nerve of the black woman and the arrogance of the American. I must say, my dear wife, those are not very attractive qualities. Don't pout, Maya, you know I love you. There are simply some things which do not become you. I gave you Gamal Nasser's book. Didn't you read it? The UAR is committed to upgrading its citizens economically as well as politically. As my wife and a foreigner as well, you would never find a job. Besides, I look after you. I like you to look after me and Guy, and here he rubbed his chin lovingly. And maybe we'll have a child, a little brother for Guy. There is a silent scream which tears through the veins, separating the muscles, pinching the nerves, yet the body seems to remain immobile. We had never talked about having children. I had one son. I seemed to have given an order to my body that one was enough, because although I used no contraceptives, I had only been pregnant the one time. He was still playing with his chin, pulling at the sparse hairs. Vooz, the rent is past due. The collectors have been here for payment on the furniture and the rugs. Guy's school has sent 2 notes home. I've read The Gardener and paid Omenadia out of my food money. I have to go to work, but I will see that everyone is paid. I always do, don't I? I wouldn't answer, and I wouldn't remind him of the New York eviction. He raised his voice. I don't throw away money, you know that. I only receive an allowance for the office and living expenses. Travel is costly. Printing charges are high. I must keep up my appearance. And so must you. We are freedom fighters. We are not beggars. Craft and cunning were necessary, and even as I schemed, I doubted if I was smart enough. Vuz, you say you need me. You need a woman, not just a hostess. Your struggle is my struggle. I need to be more involved in serving dinner to refugees and keeping your house. He started to interrupt, but I continued. If I work, you can spend the living allowance on the office. Instead of a quarterly newsletter, you could send out a monthly. We would be able to buy some warm coats for the new escapees. My salary could take care of the house expenses. He listened and his eyes shone for a second, then the light went out. Darling, you are a wonderful woman. Excuse the harsh words. You're not arrogant. You are thoughtful. I appreciate your idea, but it's not possible. You'll never find work in Cairo. Vuz, I have a job. Associate editor of the Arab Observer. I start tomorrow. I watched the disbelief on his face turn to anger, then to rage. You took a job without consulting me? Are you a man? He stood and began to pace over the expensive rug. His tirade carried him from the sofa to the entry, over to the large chair, and back to stand in front of me. His vilification included my insolence, independence, lack of respect, arrogance, ignorance, defiance, callousness, cheekiness, and lack of breeding. I sat watching him, listening and thinking. He was right. Somewhere in his swarm of words he had my apt description. I also understood that maybe I had gone too far. Even an American black man would have found such a headstrong wife unsuitable, and how much more an African husband steeped in a tradition of at least the appearance of male authority. I realized that I had handled the thing badly. I should have been more delicate. I should have allowed Vuz time to see me depressed and mournful. Then he could have coerced from me the reason for my mood. I could have so manipulated the situation that he would himself have suggested that maybe I should find a little something to do. A small part-time job. Perhaps a little secretarial work in the afternoon. With the awareness of my unfortunate mismanagement came the shocking knowledge that I was no longer in love. The man standing over me venting his fury, employing his colorful vocabulary, was no longer my love. The last wisps of mystery had disappeared. There had been physical attraction so strong that at his approach, moisture collected at every place where my body touched itself. Now he was in hand's reach, and tantalization was gone. He was just a fat man, standing over me, scolding. His anger was finally spent, his energy flagged. I waited until he backed away and sat down in the chair facing me. He was exhausted from the outpouring of reproach, and I was benumbed by the loss of love. We sat looking at each other, at the floor, at the tapestries, at each other again. He was the first to speak. His voice was soft. You must call David and explain that you acted as an American woman, but that I returned home and reminded you that now you are an African wife. I knew that neither threats nor inducements would cause me to give up the job. I made my voice silken soft. I have given my word, not only to David but to Dr. Zian Nagati. He is a friend of Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he knows that I am your wife. He said they need me. It might reflect badly on your name if I withdraw now. Vu stood again. You see? You see how your foolish, headstrong American ways have endangered the struggle? He tried to build up to the earlier anger, but was too tired to do so. He went back to the bedroom and reappeared dressed. He walked past me and out of the house, slamming the door. I stayed in the pretty living room thinking. I had a son to raise and a lovely house. I had a job for which I was unqualified. I had an angry husband whom I no longer loved. And I was in Cairo, Egypt, where I had no friends. The doorbell rang, and thinking Vuz had stalked out leaving his keys, I opened it. David Du Bois stood smiling in the dim light. I grinned because he looked like deliverance itself. Girl, I thought you might be getting nervous about tomorrow. So I came round to tell you everything's going to be all right. We sat in the living room talking lightly about journalism and expectations. I wanted to unburden my aggravation. to tell him that I not only didn't know how to be an associate editor, but that my husband was bitterly opposed to my being anything but his obedient wife. C.O.W.S walked in on our inane chatter. When he saw David, his face lightened, the heavy cheeks lifted, and he smiled delightedly. They embraced as he called David my brother. David must have noticed that he didn't speak to me. C.O.W.S, you must be proud of your wife. I mean about the job. C.O.W.S cooled and drew himself inward. Job? He said the word as if he had never used it before. David looked at me, caught the misery which I didn't try to hide. He turned back to C.O.W.S. When you were away, she telephoned me. I took her out to tea, and she said you were working so hard, stretching yourself so thin, that she was beginning to worry about your health. She said that as your wife she had to carry some of the load, that no one man could continue to do all you do without help. Thus his body began to relax. His shoulders eased down to their natural position. A slow smile began to slacken his tightened features. With words, David was stroking away his hostility. She said that most African men in your position would never allow their wives to work, but that you were a revolutionary and that the success of the African conflict was your goal, and you meant to reach it by any means necessary. C.O.W.S nodded. True, true. David was persuasive, convincing, and a liar. He was also my supportive, fast-thinking, inventive brother. I was surprised to find when C.O.W.S and I went to bed that being in the arms of a stranger in no way lessened my physical pleasure. C.O.W.S insisted on accompanying me downtown to the Arab Observer offices. When we entered the enormous loft-like room, David called from a far corner. He greeted C.O.W.S first, then me. He introduced C.O.W.S first to my colleagues, and all the men shook hands, asked after each other's health, and thanked God in Arabic. I was outside their ceremony like a foundling on an orphanage doorstep. After they finished saluting and bowing and grinning, David beckoned to me and I was presented. Although I sensed little cordiality, I relaxed because at least the men were not antagonistic. C.O.W.S's presence had assured them that I was not an audacious woman challenging their male community. I belonged to a man who, probably in straitened circumstances, was putting his wife to work. By introducing C.O.W.S first, David had followed established ritual and dissipated the hostility before it could collect. I had to admit that although C.O.W.S's decision to escort me to my job, my father never accompanied me on the off day of school, infuriated me. His attendance had been a godsend. I was shown my desk, and a servant brought us all small cups of coffee from a brazier near the window. The coffee drinking ceremony finally finished, C.O.W.S shook hands again with all the men, nodded to me, and left the office. David stayed a few minutes, then shook hands around the room. When he took my hand, he said quietly, "You've made a good impression. I'll call you later." I had said nothing, done nothing, shown no intelligence, wit, or talent. Was I to assume that was the good impression? Ignorance held me in my chair for at least an hour. Men, whose names I had already forgotten or hadn't heard clearly at the Ost introduction, passed my desk, their hands full of papers and their eyes averted. The servant brought me cup after cup of sweet sluggish coffee, which I drank dutifully. Suddenly there was a great sound of swishing papers, thumping feet, the tacking of typewriters. Dr. Nagati had arrived. He bobbed his head to the now industriously bustling reporters and came directly to my desk. "Mrs. Make?" I stood. "How are you getting on? David was here? You've been introduced? Good." He raised his voice and, speaking in Arabic, caused the employees to gather around him. Again, I stood outside the circle of men, not understanding as he continued to speak in an explosive tone. He slid into English without changing the force of speech. "Mrs. Make?" It was a shouted order to come to attention in a full dress parade. "Yes, Dr. Nagati?" I edged through the passage now made for me to face the great man. He looked down at me and tried a smile, which failed. "This man handles British news. This one is in charge of European. This one is editor of Soviet news. This one American. This one Asian. And you will write about Africa. You will also look at all their copy, and they will look at yours. The Arab Observer will be a weekly, starting next week. We print in the basement of this building. You will go downstairs now with me and meet the typesetters." Without another word, he walked away. It only took me a second to realize that he expected me to follow. We walked into the dimly lit and dusty room on the lower floor. Dr. Nagati raised his voice, hollering in Arabic. Men in traditional galabeas appeared like phantoms out of the gloom. All at once, bright lights exposed the farthest recesses. I was introduced in English as Mrs. Make, the new associate editor. The men shook my hand and welcomed me in Arabic. I smiled and wished Dr. Nagati would stay in the building forever, or at the very least return with me to the upstairs OCs. We took our leave of the printers, and he talked until we reached the door leading out of the building. The magazine must be ready for distribution next week. It must have grace and be beautiful. Its news must be timely and accurate. I must remember that although none of the men had worked with women before, except possibly secretaries, they were all cultured and capable. Speaking of secretaries, he would be sending a few over later in the week. "Goodbye, Mrs. Mate. I'm sure you'll do well." He pushed the door open and disappeared through it while my mouth was hanging open wide enough to allow in a swarm of IEs. I directed myself back to my desk. At least I knew that I was expected to cover the African affairs. It would be necessary to collect all newspapers, magazines, journals, and essays. A large map and a set of the Oxford English Dictionary would help. Now that I no longer desired views, I needed him. Every fact he'd ever learned was laid neatly in his orderly brain. He knew tribes, leaders, topography, weather, and the political stances of all countries on the continent. 2 reporters, the coffee bearer, and I reached my desk at the same time. The server set down the small cup and walked away as both the journalists drew up chairs. When I sat down, they told me their names again and began to chat with me. Quite cozily, we agreed tacitly that our first introduction had never happened. They offered to show me the telex machine and how I could acquire background material on any news release. They proposed that I move my desk into the adjoining room where there was a library with hundreds of books in English. The grin began in my stomach or behind my kneecaps or under my toenails. It undulated in sweet waves, overrunning my body with warmth and well-being. I thought of Br'er Rabbit. Like all Southern black children, I had heard folk tales since my early youth, and a favorite came back to me as I sat in that wide-open newsroom in Cairo. For years, Br'er Rabbit had been stealing carrots from a garden, and after many attempts, after many elaborate but ineffectual snares, the owner of the plot finally succeeded in catching him. The man was red as blood with anger. He shook the rabbit until his tail nearly fell off. He said, "Rabbit, I've got you now, and I'm going to do the worst thing in the world to you. I mean the baddest thing. I mean the meanest thing. I'm going to make you cry and scream and wish that God never put breath in your body." The rabbit started crying. "Please, Mr. Farmer, don't do the worst thing to me. Do anything but that. But I don't think you know what the worst thing is. So just do me as you want to do me." The rabbit started shuffling and grinning. "But don't do the worst thing." The farmer looked at the rabbit suspiciously. He asked, "What is the worst thing?" Rabbit said, "I won't tell you." The farmer began to lie. "You can tell me, little rabbit. I won't do it. I promise you." The rabbit began to relax. He asked the farmer, "Do you swear if I tell you that you won't do it to me?" The farmer put his hand on his heart and swore. The rabbit relaxed even more. He said, "Farmer, you've got a big black iron pot. You can oil it with lard and light a ray under it and cook me in boiling oil, and I wouldn't care." The farmer was doubtful, but the rabbit kept talking. "You can skin me alive and use my fur to make a coat for your little girl, and that would be all right with me." The farmer looked at the rabbit with disbelief, but the rabbit continued, "You can cut all my feet and give them to your friends for good luck, and I'd like that. But the worst thing, the farmer was getting excited. Tell me, little rabbit, what is the worst thing? The rabbit began to tremble. His voice got so little the farmer could barely hear him. See that briar patch over there? He pointed to a clump of nettles. Please don't throw me over there. The farmer's face became hard. He asked the rabbit, "Are you sure that's the worst thing?" Rabbit said, "They stick in my sides like burning needles. They pop in my eyes like thorns. They hold me like chains and lash my body like whips. Please don't throw me in the briar patch." The farmer picked up the rabbit by the ears. He lifted him high in the air and he began to swing him around over his head, all the time asking, "Are you sure?" And the rabbit answered, crying, "It's the worst thing." Finally, when the farmer had the rabbit turning at a fast speed, he pointed him toward the briar patch and let go. Br'er Rabbit landed on his feet. His eyes were dry and bright. His ears perked up and waved. Br'er Rabbit grinned at the farmer, his teeth shining white as buttermilk. He said, "Home at last. Home at last. Great God Almighty, I'm home at last." I smiled sweetly as the men shoved and pulled my desk into the library. When they left and I stood before the crowded bookshelves, reading unfamiliar titles and the names of authors unknown to me, still I felt just like Br'er Rabbit in the briar patch.
This month, Hallmark Cards will release a series of greeting cards written by poet Maya Angelou. Here now with a preview of her work is Maya Angelou.
Thanks, Tina. As always, you effervesce the sweet aroma of woman in full bloom.
Thank you. That's good, right?
Oh, yes. And now I shall read some of my Hallmark cards. I will begin with this one here. It's my favorite. I lay down in my grave and watch my children grow. Proud blooms above the weeds of death. I lay down in my grave to die. Happy 5th birthday, grandson.
That was moving. It's a very moving sentiment.
It made my grandson cry for days. And look, there's a little slot to put money in.
Oh, see, that's perfect. Yeah.
This next one is my favorite. I see you brown skin, neat afro, full lips, a little goatee. A Malcolm, a Martin, Du Bois. Sunday service becomes sweeter when you are black, black like the night. Happy bar mitzvah, you little boy.
Great. It's going to be a big seller. Great.
May I please read this one? It's my favorite. To my darling husband on our 20th anniversary. You are the air that gives me a life I hope will never end.
Well, that's beautiful. Is there anything on the inside?
Yes, a fake booger. And it says I picked out something special for you. It's kind of a gag card.
That's good. Maya Angelou, everyone.
Context of white supremacy. See, they had Tracy Morgan. See? I told you they had so many installments of a black dude, mostly, never a black female, just black dudes, mostly, playing Maya Angelou, that, you know, what, I mean, I confess, I don't watch Saturday Night Live, Buckwheat, all the rest of it. They practice a lot of white supremacy racism, have for 50 years. That's what they're celebrating right now, a half century of racism, white supremacy. Saturday, where my man Boo said, hey, Saturday night, I'm black and I'm dangerous. Saturday Night Live, they say they do a whole skit about that. But they got all these sketches, and I think some of them, they might have went on for years because they have a lot of different black males portraying Maya Angelou. I don't even know if we have enough time, because I found this kind of late. I don't even know if we have enough time before we wrap up the book next week to get all of the segments in that I did find. We'll do our best. We've heard 2 thus far, and I forgot last week. I was so slovenly. Any hoodles. We'll resume audio segment number 2, and then we'll finish it up next week. Folks who have commentary, the number 605-313-5164, the code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The number again, 605-313-5164. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email, untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. Let us know if you have thoughts, observations as we get ready to wrap up the text. Again, now for black females listening to the program, let us know, did you read this book, own this book, did you know about this book prior to us getting to the Katherine Massey book club? Just curious. Like I said, they're talking about, who is ignorant about racism and who is informed. Like, it's been my experience, I've never heard a black person cite this book before or have this book on their shelf. Even that would have counted for me. Like, oh wow, I've never seen them. Okay, I know why the caged bird sings and the heart of a woman. But I've never seen it. Let us know. Maybe it's just old Leroy, Devontae, Jamal. Maybe it's just us black dudes that been laming out and playing video games, watching the Super Bowl, and not reading Maya Angelou's autobiography. Buddy, I wonder if the black dude who was at the UN who was fitting to rape Maya Angelou, I wonder if Buddy read this book. Thinking, wow, that's me. That was us. We were up in the stairwell. I was about to rape her. Terry Gross was right. I wonder if he actually read this book. Maybe he should at least got a free copy. Yes? No books for thugs. Let's see. Folks who dialed in, if you have commentary to share as we get ready to wrap it up, next week we'll be all done. Final thoughts as we close in on The Heart of a Woman. Let's see. Email, phone. Let's see. Lauren, if you have commentary, we'll hear your thoughts. Then we'll nab some of our emails, other folks who dial in as well.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. First, I had not heard of this book before. You said we were going to read it in book club, and I certainly had not read it. I've only read one of Maya Angelou's books. I know why the caged bird sings and some of her poetry. That's really all I was familiar with. Yeah, I'm ill-informed. And also, you said when you were talking about the Maya Angelou skits on SNL, you said black dudes mostly play Miss Angelou on the skits. Why did you say mostly? Did white men play Miss Angelou?
Maybe. There we go. Yeah, I don't watch Saturday Night Live like all the time, but they do at least have skits posted where it looks like they also had white women portray Maya Angelou, which is probably something racist on a different level, like the white, I don't know if that's the white blackface or just the white people pretending to be black people, or however you want to phrase that. But they have black dudes do Maya Angelou, and then they have white women do Maya Angelou at least. Maybe they have other people too.
Okay, that's interesting. For my comments, so right at the beginning of the session, this was chapter 15, paragraph 3, I guess. Miss Angelou and her son, Guy, they get to the airport, okay? And they get off the plane, they're in the airport, and one of the porters asked them if they wanted a taxi. And at this point, that's when Miss Angelou realizes she doesn't even know the address of where they're going. I was astounded. I cannot imagine getting on a plane and taking an international flight and not having an address for where I was going when I got there. I mean, okay, because right there when they got there, Booz wasn't there, but they sent someone to pick them up. But what if the plane had been, say, 5 hours late? What would they have done then? It seems to be a terrible lack of a plan. I wouldn't go to another city in this part of the world without having some sort of arrangements for where I was going. I would be very uncomfortable with that low level of planning. Let me see. Okay. When she goes to the new residence, and it's supposed to be a lot of fancy things in there, the couches, the rugs, this sort of stuff. And she made the comment, she said something like, "It's all this crap ours," or something like that. And the two males were not very pleased with her. And she said, "A profound sense of worthlessness had made me pull away from owning good things, expensive furniture, rare rugs. That was exactly how white folks wanted me to feel. I was black, so obviously I didn't deserve to have armoires shiny with good French veneer or tapestry." And I don't know. Whether a black person, has nice things or doesn't have things that are considered nice, we're still victims of racism. And, having what she said was a profound sense of worthlessness, I think that's just your mind acknowledging the truth. I'm not trying to be pessimistic or whatever one might call it, but non-white black people are relatively worth less in a system of racism, white supremacy. A black person with a fancy couch is just a black person with a fancy couch. That's it. I know the comment she made probably, that seemed discourteous, but that's true. We don't own anything. We just have or use the things that races allow us to have or use. That's it. When she was listing, let me see. Okay, she said, if Vu thought he wanted his wife to live beautifully, he was no less a man, and I had to get that under the layers of inferiority in my brain than a Rockefeller or a Kennedy. And I disagree. I don't think that's true. I don't think Vu is a man, and certainly, hey, a white man who doesn't have a lot of money is a man, but a Rockefeller or a Kennedy, you're going to compare him to the most powerful white men? That just seems like an absurd comparison to me. Later, she was talking about, after they had been there for a little bit and she starts meeting all the people and all the places they were from, she called them freedom fighters. And she said she had these introductions to freedom fighters from Uganda, Kenya, I don't know, Tanganyika? I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, and North and South Rhodesia. It just made me realize how long ago this was. When I saw Rhodesia written there, this was so long ago that Zimbabwe was still Rhodesia. This was way before Michael Swango got out there. And also, didn't Dylan Storm Roof write that thing he wrote, that manifesto? It was called The Last Rhodesian, I think. I didn't read it, but I think that's what it was called. Let me see. Also, okay, it said, I was the heroine in a novel teeming with bejeweled women handsome men, intrigue, international spies, and danger. Opulent fabrics, exotic perfumes, and the service of personal servants threaten to tear from my mind every memory of growing up in America as a second-class citizen. I didn't even think of Dr. Wilson. I could have swore she talked about like being a second-class citizen. You know, something like if you're second-class, then you might not be a citizen. I'm paraphrasing. And also, it made me think of Mr. Fuller, too, because he talked about class in his book. And I think what he had to say was, you know, if it was, you're going to talk about class, it shouldn't be high class, middle class, low class. It should be, you know, the powerful class and the relatively powerless class. I think that's how he said it. I haven't read it in a couple of years, but I think that's how it went. Let me see. She said they were out somewhere. This is later, and she says her heart thumped, and I reached for Vu, who, hating public displays of attachment unless he initiated them, stepped away but stayed close enough to whisper. And I thought that was interesting that, you know, he didn't like the public displays of affection. I don't necessarily like it either, but it seems like something that black people typically are not allowed to do. And then she had that whole part about the voice. Okay, she said the voice of an adult black male has undeniable textures. It has a quality of gloss, slithery as polished onyx, or it can be nubby and notched with harshness. The voice can be sonorous as a bass solo or light and lyrical as a flute. When a black man speaks in a flat tone, it is not only intentional, but instructional to the listener. Wow. That was quite the paragraph. It sounded interesting, even though I really didn't know what she meant. It was like a lot of words, but I just, yeah, I don't know. Oh, what would happen to the children's minds when uninformed police stick dogs on them just because they wanted to get to class? I don't understand why the word uninformed had to be in there. I don't understand what she thinks of the police, so-called the law enforcement officers. What is it that she thinks they don't know? I have to just ask that question. She can't answer it, but it's, I guess it's a pretty common trope. Then she finds out, you know, that they owe money for the rugs and the furniture and all of this stuff, and it just seems like maybe some more questions should have been asked since they just came out of the same situation in New York. You just got evicted, you got on a plane, and, I mean, the same thing's going to happen again? I don't know. Let me see. It just, I think, like, all the fancy stuff in the apartment, it's Vu. It's like him showing off. So I was thinking that, you know, I wasn't certain, but I was wondering, like, if he hadn't paid for the furniture and the rugs, and why did they have to have servants? Like, that's not even necessary. They didn't have any servants in New York. It seems like showing off. And then later on, he said, I don't throw away money. You know that. I only receive an allowance for the office and living expenses. Travel is costly. Printing charges are high. And then he said, I must keep up my appearance. And so must you. We are freedom fighters. We are not beggars. So it seems like it is showing off. I don't know. Seems like she's no longer in love, whatever that means. I don't know. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
It does seem that way, man. Hey, that love thing, man. Here today, gone tomorrow. It's quick, too. Love don't live here no more. Incidentally, this was Rhodesia, not Zimbabwe. I don't even know at this point. Michael Swango might not even have been born yet at this point. I had to go back and check his birth. Like, we're talking 1960? Like, oof, maybe. He'd have been too young to even spell poison at that point, but he was getting close. And indeed, a sick white brother, the last Rhodesian, Yep. Before he went to go and tear up the church and Reverend Clementa Pinckney, state senator, he did pen The Last Rhodesian. In fact, that is a whole genre. I was trying to confirm that, and the New York Times has an article, Rhodesia's dead, but white supremacists have given it new life online. And then they got all this racist white supremacist propaganda, and the one in the middle caught my attention. Be a man among men. And it's got a picture of a white man with a gun in Rhodesia. Could be Michael Swango. Vial of poison, but, killer all the same. That was Michael Swango's that they said when he got to Africa, that I got to be myself. Don't even know how many Negroes I killed to this day, and never prosecuted for any of it. In fact, he won a discrimination case, said they were practicing anti-white racism against him in Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe rolling over in his grave. Jesus. Much obliged. Lauren, let's see, we'll nab an email, *61 for folks on the line. Get email number 1 in. Let's see, email number 1. Greetings, Gus, listeners and callers. I remember black, mostly male comedian. Hey, he said the same way I said it. I'm going to have to see now. Who else other than black males, if anybody that did watch Saturday Night Live, I've seen a white woman do Maya Angelou. Who else have they had do portray Maya Angelou on Saturday Night Live? Did they get any black females? Because they have black females on the cast and have had them previously. So do they get black females? Do they get other white women? Because I've seen one. So they have a number of white women portray her. Do they get white dudes? Do they get non-white, non-black people, male or female, to portray her? Because it seems like this was a long-running thing of them kind of mocking Dr. Maya Angelou on Saturday Night Live, generally with black dudes, mostly with black dudes. Mocking and ridiculing Dr. Angelou through impersonations. David Allen Greer, who we heard today. Oh, wait a minute, make sure. We heard Tracy Morgan today. I had to go back in my brain computer. We heard Tracy Morgan today. Sorry, but I got to keep track of which black. And is that Neely Fuller Jr.? All those decades in advance, live on Saturday night. They're going to have a black dude in a dress and earrings and lipstick. And then not just doing any old random black female, Dr. Maya Angelou, who was in Roots and a victim of rape. And I think all this happened while Obama was in office, if that means anything. And she was at the inauguration of President Clinton. That's who they pick. We're going to mock her on a reoccurring basis. This was probably happening while we were reading I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and I just wasn't aware because I don't watch Saturday Night Live. Anyway, can't prove it. He did say when he was ignorant and watched Saturday Night Live, our writer, that he chuckled, and I think that's all of us. I used to love Pulp Fiction back and see things. What Fuller say? Many of us, we see racism, white supremacy, but we don't see what we are looking at. And that is when you are confused about white supremacy, racism. Like, man, whew. Can't prove it, but I am suspicious that the full title of the play, The Blacks a Clown Show, was edited out of this book by white people. Now that would be interesting too, if we could get the actual typewritten copies or handwritten copies to see. Now, did she have the full title in the book? I brought this up last week. Did Dr. Angelou, did she leave that out? Or did white people leave it out? Chapter 15. Ramshackle Mercedes-Benz, shiny European cars, large horned cows, careening taxis, and throngs of pedestrians, goats, mules, camels, scents of spices, manure, gasoline, exhaust. Racist white supremacists make sure that areas where predominantly non-white victims live are chaotic, maybe even dangerous. 2. A profound sense of worthlessness had made me pull away from owning things, expensive furniture, rare rugs. Lauren talked about this passage as well. I think there is truth in this statement and how racist white supremacists condition us to feel. Absolutely. And I would agree. I think Lauren said as well, you got victims of racism who have so-called nice things, and then you have victims of racism who are not allowed to have nice things. They're still victims of racism. That's the big thing not to get confused about. Amen. The other thing, it reminded me like, now wait a minute. We have almost read this full book. Do you all remember Dr. Angelou talking about way back when she was in San Francisco? She said that she and Guy, when he was younger, and it was just those two, she said when she was working and she was getting good money, they would go and stay in the 5-star, ritziest possible hotels and do it up. And then when she was out of work and didn't have any money, they would go and get like a rooming house or something like that, and they would just make food on a hot plate and do, just get by as best they can. And I think we commented then, because it sounded somewhat similar. And I think we were saying then, like, man, forget all that showing off. Save that money. Like, you could be saving away and have a little bit more stability, because I think that was a part of that, all that, we got to move around and go to all these different schools, and hey, squirrel that money away, save, as opposed to going and getting the ritziest this and Mercedes-Benz this and, all that. But I thought, she wrote about that at the beginning of the book. It didn't seem like she had a sense of, I'm not worthy of the 5-star hotel. Like, at the beginning of the book, I'm just, hey, lots of us have contradictions. Just pointing that out. Whatever. 3. The voice of an adult American black man has undeniable texture. Oh, we got 2 in a row, so Lauren read about that one too. I have never heard the voice of an African American black male described in this way. Man, wait a minute now. Yours truly, I'm pretty slithery. Anyway. David Dubois is the son of Shirley Graham and stepson of W.E.B. Dubois. Wow, and I think he passed away in Ghana, unless I've been misinformed. That whole passage about the voices, we talked about that a lot. I mean, it's not quite up there with black culture as fried chicken, but I mean, okay. So, does Cat Williams sound slithery? Onyx, polished. She didn't even just say onyx. So when you hear Cat Williams, he sounds like polished onyx. That sweet cadence. When you hear Chris Rock, he sounds like polished onyx. Al Sharpton. Lil Wayne. I'm sure I could, Flavor Flav. I'm sure I could, continue. And I mean now, hey, you do have some black males who, you didn't say old Denzel Washington. You didn't say James Earl Jones, who was mentioned in the book. Hey, yours truly, old slithery Gus T. But not all black dudes sound like Richard Pryor. I mean, we could go on and on. Like, not all black dudes sound like that. Obviously, not all black American, not all of the black dudes who have 8 black grandparents all born in Mississippi, they don't all sound no black. I don't even know what that is. Black. I've never heard anybody. Woo wee! Who is that on that microphone? That black onyx voice? Woo wee! What? What? Victims guaranteed qualified. Let's see. With an air of insouciance, definition, casual lack of concern, indifference. She does have that vocabulary. Love it. 5. We wondered how black parents in America could let their children walk between rows of cursing, spitting white women and men. Love that she has white women first. En route to school, what would happen to the children's minds when the uniformed police sick dogs on them just because they wanted to get to class? Didn't she send her her black child to a white school? I guess she didn't have to go through mobs and such. I guess that's a slight difference. Anyway, I have to believe that at least some of the parents who placed their children in these circumstances had regret. The hardest job in the known universe, for sure. We did read Melba Patilla Beal's Warriors Don't Cry. She was one of those black children who went through all that, and we followed that up reading Elizabeth and Hazel about Elizabeth Eckford, who was also one of those 9 at the Little Rock 9, and talking about all of the terrorism and trauma that was her entire life. The biography kings. But we read that before we read Dr. Maya Angelou, but those were kind of, especially Elizabeth Eckford, like, woo, that was so awful, like generationally awful, just all, man. Yes, that would be one that would make you wonder, now, was this the best decision? And talk about ill-prepared. I mean, there's ill-prepared. We're going to fly to Egypt. Where's the address once we get it? You're asking too many questions. Let's just get on the plane. Shut up. That's ill-prepared. And then, okay, look here, Lakeisha. I know you're 13 and scared. Don't even worry about it. We're going to go to school tomorrow. You're going to be the first Negra ever to go to this school. Now, there might be armed white people who try to kill you, me, your whole family. Don't even worry about it. Going to school, it's going to be great. What do we do if they try to get... Don't even ask a whole lot. Just, pray on it. It'll be good. Let's go. That is also ill-prepared. Yikes. Let's see. Number 6. Surely exhibitionism was a part of our decision to sing in a room of talkers. Admittedly, Africa was our place of genesis. That was when they gave me pause too, like, oh God, here we go again. Long, long ago, I could not read, because that would be true for white people, true, yes? Racist man, racist woman, because, hey, Mike Swango, I'm going home. I could not read their minds, but their faces were wide open for allegiance to our songs. Vooz helped David and me reestablish for ourselves a connection to a bitter, beautiful past. Maybe an attempt to overcome a feeling of insecurity, being diasporans. Look at that. Look. I don't know either. Woo, Lord. VGQ. Chapter 16. The Arab Observer editorial position. Girl, you realize you and I are the only black Americans working in the news media in the Middle East? Question. I watched the disbelief on his face. You took a job without consulting me? Are you a man? Question. I had a job for which I was unqualified. Another possible theme of this book is Mrs. Angelou accepting jobs which she feels she is unqualified for, even though she seems to excel in these jobs. Maybe in some respects she can be described as an autodidactic, a person who is able to educate themselves or not requiring formal education. It does seem like once she takes these jobs where she is not totally informed, like she hasn't had maybe direct experience doing these things before, hasn't been formally taught how to do these specific jobs, that she does take on that responsibility seriously and will go about the task of learning, okay, this is what I need to know and this is what I need to figure out, and she'll ask for help from other people if she needs to. She displayed that back when she was in New York as well. So that, hey, there's that one having the gusto, hey, cha-ching. And then 2, to put the shoulder into it, as they say, elbow grease into it, as they say, metaphors. Just put the time and energy to work to learn what you don't know so that you can hold on to these jobs once you acquire them. Bravo. Bravo. That's not faking it till you're making it. That's, you get your foot in the door, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to be successful. And if nobody's going to help me learn, I'm going to make time on my own to learn for myself. Bravo. Let's see. Maybe her feeling of being unqualified is due to her not going to college, at least at this point. I think Paul Robeson was also an autodidactic didactic. I said it, thank God. In some respects, since he could teach himself a foreign language in a weekend. The Cow's Book Club, Paul Robeson, The Artist as Revolutionary, Gerald Horne, many times guest on the program. Once again, the biography Kings. And we will pause there. And there's so many parts in that portion right there. One, her getting the job, and I think Lauren talked about this too, that also in terms of not enough questions asked going into this marriage, and then going to a different continent, going to another side of the planet. Man, we just got thrown out on the street, and you have a child. Like, whoa, that's, man, as an attempted parent, like, I have to do everything that I possibly can, try to stay stable, make sure that this child has a place to stay. Now, I'm not in charge of that in the system of white supremacy, but I'm at least do the best that I can to make that stable, safe for my child on a planet that is inherently unsafe, dominated by white supremacy. I'm not going to, like, whoa, where are we staying at, and blah, blah, blah. When are we coming back? I mean, it would have to be lots of questions asked, and exactly as she said, like, there's no way that this can happen again. We get thrown out over here in the continent. Now what am I going to do? What are we, excuse me, it's not just me, what are we, me and God, now what are we going to do? Don't even have anybody that I can call, you know. Can we stay on your couch or anything like that? Like, oh my God. And then are you a man? Oh my gosh, just wow. I said that really, that in a book, Heart of a Woman, every other paragraph for most of the book, I'm a man, and then you get the same thing from Booze. I'm a man. He put the African in front of it, same thing. I'm a man. I mean, you'd have been evicted twice. You got everybody on the continent is snickering about you. He ain't paid for none of the kitchen furniture. He ain't paid the gardener. He ain't paid none of the servants. About to get everything repossessed, and he around here showing off. Ain't it disgraceful? That's your African king. It's Saturday night. I'm black, and I'm dangerous. About to be repossessed, so I'm extra dangerous. About to be evicted against, I'm extra dangerous. Embarrassing, man. We do not, and see that for it to come up all throughout, and at a time where you got black people all over the world. I'm a man, literally walking around in the streets in public with signs. I'm a man. I'm a woman. No. And 2025 still true. The work aspect, though, that did kind of stick out. Like, wow. I guess now Dr. Angelou is not, I guess she's not doctor at this juncture. So, you know, I guess she might feel, and particularly I think when she was, remember back when she was going to volunteer and then start working for the SCLC and helping out with Dr. King and their efforts, it did seem like some of the equipment and the office work that she was going to be doing, it did seem that she didn't have any direct experience with that. So I can feel in those circumstances like, wow, I do not really know what I'm doing. It's going to be what they call it a learning curve. At minimum, it's going to take some on-the-job training for me to figure out, you know, what's going on here. Now, we've heard that from some of these white authors too, where they do the same thing, where they're not qualified and they have talked about lying, Jeff Toobin and all, where they've lied about these type of things to gain access, to get jobs and move their career along. And it's not faking it till they make it. They just lied, you know, to get access that they needed, lied about being an attorney or whatever else until they figured it out. But you know, Dr. Angelou, even, she told them, remember we asked that question in Neutralizing Workplace Racism, she told them that she wasn't qualified, and then, you know, they said don't worry about it, and then she still went about putting in the time and energy to learn so she could be competent in her new job. Wish more of us could get that opportunity. And then we'll save the rest until we get a little bit further in the text. Let's see, I'll go and get some of my notes really quick. *61 if other folks have commentary. We have Black female listeners, now let us know. Did you know about this book at all? Read this book? Own it? Even if you just owned it and hadn't read it, that would be, you know, you can let us know that. I'm just curious because I had never heard of, seen this book at all. Let's see. She says when they get to the continent at the airport, they end up in this ramshackle Mercedes-Benz. Let's had a minor chuckle there. For whatever reason, Mercedes-Benz keeps popping up. Dr. Welsing was asked, you know, can you make a Mercedes-Benz? They got the ramshackle version of it that I guess a black person did not manufacture on the continent. Let's see. She talks about, I guess, the chaos of being out here and doing whatever. Let's see. They go to check out this big house or what have you, and then she gives her speech. Like I said, it seemed like she did have expensive stuff before. Whatever. They move on through that bit of conflict. Let's see. Guy goes to the American College at Massey and was picked up for this 15-mile bus ride out of Cairo to go to school. And then he said he might have felt the need to show off for his schoolmates and new teachers, so the abrupt cultural change may have prompted him. But whatever the reasons, he did extremely well in his studies. Like, I have never in my life heard of someone showing off academically. Like, what? I thought you go to school and show off. I mean, you see these new Jordans, man, woo, man, like crispy or something like that. Like, you know, we got new outfits, or, you know, got my hair done or something of that nature. Like, no, we got a new car, you know, in high school or something like that, but not, what? You got all A's? Like, what? What? Now that's showing off. That's showing off. Man, look how I use that brain. You see that? Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Dean's List. Look at that. Look at that. That is some showing off. Let's see. Didn't even have to urge him on for his homework or anything. He had clarity and cheerful attitude. Like, wow. I thought as well, I'm a big fan of traveling. Now, Guy's a lot older at this point, but hey, maybe more folks, especially once you're older, being able to travel and see different parts of the world. And it seemed he was so excited about coming here anyway that, you know, he just got a real zest for life, getting out of that whole eviction situation. Don't have the savages chasing you around to kill you and racist white teachers, or I don't know if he had racist white teachers or not, but whole zeal for learning. Whoopee. She says that there was an Afro-Asian Solidarity Conference in downtown Cairo. Booze thought I'd like to attend. Me too. Like, what? Now, the Bandung Conference had just happened a few years ago. That is a historic event. They have whole books about that. Minister Malcolm talks about that, and many others. So this sort of thing was not unheard of at the time. But I mean, wow, I have not heard of anything like that at the time, especially the Bandung Conference. I think they were explicit about white people not being allowed. Wow, to hear even something phrased in that way, an Afro-Asian Solidarity Conference. We're going to sit down and talk about racism and things that we can do to maybe work together constructively, or, you know, whatever. Like, wow, that is uncommon. I would have wanted to go too. See, what are they talking about? Have to check to see if they have anything in the newspaper about all of this. Let's see. Which he talks about the black male voice specifically, and polished onyx and whatever else. Metaphor. She says that when he speaks, when Leroy is speaking to you in a flat tone, it is not only intentional, but instructional to the listener. Instructional about what? I was thinking. Now, again, insert Cat Williams. What? Anyway, VGQ. I was also stunned because we had a teaspoon of dry January in the text. She said, I learned to cook elaborate dinners without pork and served chilled, fruity, unalcoholic punches when our guests were Muslim. I nearly fell out in the floor because it's been so much drinking, and even when they, say that they're getting serious about something, they still got to go to the bar to talk about what Dr. King said or have some brandy or scotch or whatever. What? We can actually have non-alcoholic beverages? What? That is stunning. Maybe we should all be Muslim. If sobriety is going to be best, well then, hey, assalamu alaikum, Minister Matt, hey, put that malt liquor down. Jeez. Let's see. Algerian having all these different events happening at this time. Like, wow, what an incredible time to be on the continent and paying attention and meeting all these people. Just amazing. Let's see. We get quite a bit of black male patriarchy and sexism this week, right? Booze is ordering her around and get in that kitchen, woman, make some fried chicken. I'm gonna invite folks over and we're gonna have a soiree and chit chat and get in that kitchen, make that food. Just volunteering her, and she does it dutifully at first and then is happy to talk to David afterward, and they do their singing and all of that. Incidentally, when she mentions some of the things that they talked about, they would talk about Chambé and the Belgian-owned Union Minière. Ooh, that right there, still at it right now, when they talk about all that going on right now, and the Rwandan rebels going over in the mineral-rich section of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and all that. Same thing today. Apple event, all of that. I'm sure there are connections between the Belgian white-owned Union Minière and Apple. I am sure. Probably Tesla too now. Let's see. And then we got it 2 times. Oh, and then I loved it. Lauren, she said, what would happen to the children's minds when uninformed police sick dogs on them just because they wanted to get to class? That why are they? And you hear that across the generations, where she sticks to that interview that I started with today. That was from 1983. This book was published in 1981, but she's talking about events in the early 1960s. So 20 years earlier. White people are ignorant. Not all white people are racist, which she has said in the book. And then the white people who are racist are ignorant and uninformed. What kind of illogic is that? The ignorant, uninformed white people all have dogs to sick on black people and all over the world, because they did the same thing in the Congo too, and they got videos of that. We talked about that in the last book we read. They sick the dogs on Andrée Blouin too. VGQ. I guess they uninformed at Saturday Night Live too, to always get these black dudes in a dress to play Maya Angelou. That's uninformed and ignorant white people too. Victims guaranteed qualified. Oh my God, I wanted to vomit. Pause. I think I can let it ride on this so we can get to audio segment 2. She said, first half-heartedly informed by the knowledge that we were airing melodies written by the last large group of people enslaved on the planet. That is not true. Slavery ended in Brazil substantially later than it did in the U.S. We got to put the exact date on that. But I mean, we read Black Man in Brazil. Slavery didn't end. Slavery of black people did not end in Brazil until 1888. That is 25 years after the Civil War is over there. Even if you want to count, slavery is ongoing now, blah, 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 that is for sure still the case in Brazil. Like, that kind of offended me. Like, whoa, that is so there are more black people in South America than there are in the United States. The highest concentration of black people in the Western Hemisphere is Brazil, not the U.S. Most of the black people who were stolen and enslaved from the continent where she is writing this about, they were not taken to the U.S. They were taken to South America and the Caribbean. Slavery ended way late, like decades later in Brazil than it did in the U.S. I mean, that is totally, absolutely, factually false. And dare I say, to write this book in 1981, you should know that, which is what I would say about Gus T. Like, we did read Black Man in Brazilian Soccer. It's in the book When Slavery Ended, and that's important, man. Like, dang, they didn't just have black people enslaved in the U.S. These are not pretend black people, and I mean, they had for real. So that the rewind, because I just said it earlier this week, they had a policy of institutionally raping black males in Brazil, and this is written fact. That is not something to ignore, minimize, and more black people than we have in the U.S., like all the way around, like, ugh, 3 thumbs down. Like, editor, somebody should have caught that. Like, no, that's not even factually accurate. Anyway, let's see. Chapter 7. I feel like I should have said, oh, and they're showing off. Like, wow, we can't even pay for the furniture and we got to have servants? Lawrence said the same thing. Like, come on, man, who are we showing off for? Let's say that even if we're dedicated so-called freedom fighters, the money that we're spending on the help, so-called, so we can pretend to be like white people, you could be putting out more newsletters and investing in your groups and travel expenses and everything else that you got to do, instead of trying to show off, having all these lame parties and making unalcoholic pina coladas with no liquor. Come on. Incidentally, when Dr. Angelou, when she's having to explain to Vuz, who is an African, about, she wants to work in all of this, Dr. Angelou later on talks about, being a black female having to work, that they didn't have that same luxury that white women enjoyed all over the world, to chill out while their race soldier husbands went out and so-called earned the bacon, terrorized black people, that they didn't have the same luxury that, black females were forced to go all the way back on the plantation. They had to get out in the field and work just like black male slaves did. They got beaten and had to pick cotton just like black male slaves did. And that continued right on after the Civil War. Facts. So that did stand out a little bit. And even some of that, trying to emulate the same power regime setup that white men have had at many times. And that's not even, enduring. You get Hillary Clinton. Margaret Thatcher. Anyway. But that's so embedded. You can't even support you can't even pay the bills. You can't even pay the gardener. Got everybody gossiping and snickering about you, and you're supposed to be a man. No, man. No, that's what I said. That, for me, one of the major themes. Like, wow. In the book, The Heart of a Woman, do not qualify. God doesn't qualify as a man. Vuz doesn't qualify as a man. Just nope. And we still are confused about all that. We insist on being men and women, and that white people are ignorant about racism. And all of those are flaws that continue right on to the end. Flaws Neely Fuller dedicated all this time and energy to trying to correct. That struggle continues. I will pause there. We will resume. If you have thoughts, didn't get to share, jot them down, jot an email. We'll have time. Dr. Maya Angelou's The Heart of a Woman, Katherine Massey Book Club, audio section number 2.
Chapter 17. For 2 weeks, I stayed in the room, using each free moment to cull from the shelves information about journalism, writing, Africa, printing, publishing, and editing. Most of the books have been written by long-dead authors and published years before in Britain. Still, I found nuggets of useful facts. The arrival of secretaries forced me back into the larger room with my male colleagues, but by that time I had a glimmering of journalistic jargon. I began to combine a few news items taken directly from the telex and insert some obscure, slightly relevant background information. Then I would rehead the copy and call it my own. I stayed at the Arab Observer for over a year, and gradually my ignorance receded. I learned from Abdul Hassan how to write an opinionated article with such subtlety that the reader would think the opinion his own. Eric Nems, the layout artist, showed me that where an article was placed on a page, its typeface, even the color of ink, were as important as the best written copy. David Du Bois demonstrated how to select a story and persevere until the last shred of data was in my hands. Vu supplied me with particulars on the politically fluid, newly independent African states. I received a raise from Dr. Nagati, the respect of my fellow workers, and a few compliments from strangers. Weekdays began with a family breakfast served by Omanadia. Vu's read the newspaper, Guy's face was buried in a book, and I scanned work I always brought to the table. Often after we left the house, going separate ways, I would think that we had again lost the art of talking together. We had ceased to find amusement in one another. Guy's life was becoming intricately complicated. He was asked to cope with adolescent sexuality, the enigmatic Arabic language, a body which seemed to be stretching to touch the clouds, and another joyless home. In attempting to protect himself, he withdrew into books or threw himself into the wild, raucous Cairo streets. I offered to give parties for his Arab friends so that he could spend more time in the house. He refused politely but coolly, saying that neither he nor his acquaintances wanted to be shut up indoors. They'd rather be in the souks and back streets, the old town and the great El Tahrir Square, and don't worry about him, he was just fine. Neither of us could successfully masquerade our unhappiness from the other. We had been too close too long. We accepted with mutual respect the other's pretense at contentment. Thus's work doubled. The number of men escaping from South Africa was escalating. Some only reached northern Rhodesia, where they stayed hidden until arrangements could be made for their further escape. A few men lodged in Ethiopia, but they had to be moved, and thus's responsibility was to find friendly nations where the now homeless wanderers could stay. All needed clothes, food, housing. Some wanted military training, while others asked for medical or legal education. Thus's concern in their behalf never wavered. Although the romance in our marriage had evaporated, I still admired and appreciated him. I even loved him. I simply was not in love with him. There was ample evidence that he had other romantic interests anyway. Often, he returned home very late, reeking of perfume, heavy-lidded, and offering no explanation. On a few evenings, he didn't return at all. I said nothing. I had my work, my house, and had made 2 friends, a B. Williamson, the round pretty wife of the Liberian Chargdares, and Kebedicher Dachu, wife of the Ethiopian embassy's first secretary. On the surface, we seemed to have nothing in common save our gender and blackness. Kebedich was thin, small, and married to a son of the Royal Selassie house. She was as beautiful as antique gold and as reserved as a vault, and lent credence to the common African saying that the loveliest women on the continent were to be found in Ethiopia. Her own beauty was legendary. One day in Addis Ababa, the regal Jaramin saw her from a passing car and determined, at that hasty glance, that he would find her, woo her, and wed her. The ensuing courtship and marriage became the subject of popular songs sung in the streets and cafes of Ethiopia. 7 years later, they still shared languid looks across crowded rooms. They were childless and lived in Zamalek in a quiet, luxurious apartment with an ancient manservant they had brought from Ethiopia. A B friends called her Banti had been raised in the underdeveloped Grand Bassa region of Liberia. Her family sent her to Monrovia, the capital city, for further education. Her pert looks and witty good humor won her friends and marriage to a bright young lawyer whose career was just beginning to rise. The couple lived in the ambassador's residence with their own 3 children, Banti's younger sister, the teenage daughter of a friend, 2 Liberian maids, a nanny, an Egyptian laundryman, a doorman, and a cook. The building shivered with sound. Noisy children played tag games on the graceful staircase. West African high life music boomed from the large record player. Young girls giggled over young girl secrets in the ceremonial drawing room, and Banty moved her short, chubby body through the house, her laughter adding one more spice to the already aromatic cacophony. Kebby, Banty, and I met several times at diplomatic receptions and at my house during one of our costly parties. But we didn't cross the threshold from courteous acquaintance into friendship until one night at the Liberian residence when an overflow of visitors filled every inch of space in the building's first floor. African, Asian, and European diplomats with their wives mingled with Egyptian government officials and their wives. Waiters, hired for the occasion, prodded through the throng, shoving trays of drinks toward the crowded guests. I was sitting with a Yugoslavian woman in the informal lounge when I heard Vuss's voice as part of the general murmur of the crowd in another room. I speak for the Xhosa, the Zulu, the Shona, and the Lesotho. You are a foolish people. Foolish. I jumped up and, remembering my manners just in time, excused myself. Vuz was cozying up the Yugoslavians at that time. I nudged my way through the flock of people. Vuss's tone was becoming louder. A foolish, small-minded, greedy nation. You are mean and stupid. Stupid? I had arrived sooner than I expected because as I pushed forward, people nearer the action pulled away, impossibly dispersing. I saw Vuz standing face to face with a white man whose red cheeks and popped eyes were his only evidence of life. He stood stone stiff. He might have died erect and been left on the spot to be viewed like a statue. Vuss's face, however, was alive with contempt, and his right arm was raised. He was poking the white man's chest with his forefinger. Tell the savages of your country that Mother Africa will no longer allow them to suck from her breast. I knew that Vuz was intoxicated with either alcohol or rage or a dangerous combination of the two. All sounds had diminished to a low, steady, disapproving undertone. I felt as powerless as if I were mute or hypnotized. I speak for Southern Africa, for Southwest Africa, for Mozambique, Angola, and Ethiopia. The sound came from the rear and grew louder as the speaker neared Vuz. He speaks for the Amharas and the Gullahs and for the Eritreans. Jara appeared, having pressed his way through the pack of bodies. He stood beside Vuz. There was another movement. I saw another separation, and Kebby appeared to stand near Jara. Her movement gave me the courage to edge nearer Vuz, but we acted with different motives. She was displaying her support of Jara. I was hoping that my presence would provoke Vuz into gathering his control. We stood in the center of the room like warring tribes in a forest clearing, and we had reached a stalemate. Joe Williamson's already high-pitched voice soared over the crowd. Brothers. Brothers. Joe stepped up to Vuz and Jara daintily like a proud bantam rooster. Argument is one thing. Riot is another. This is not an occasion for either. Without changing tone, he spoke in Liberian patois. Old man say in my country, hurry, hurry get dear tomorrow. Take time, get there today, or better yet, we come to party to show our teeth. We go to war to show our arms. Vuz turned to look at Joe, and I held my breath. Joe was the doyen of the African Diplomatic Corps. He had been supportive of Vuz and all the other freedom fighters and was highly respected in Cairo, and I liked him. If Vuz turned on Joe, I could cross him on our list of acquaintances because Vuss's tongue could be sharp as an assegai, and Joe was a proud man. Vuz smiled and shook his head. He said, Bro Joe, you should be president of this entire continent. Jara, taking his cue from Vuss's relaxation, said, Speak for the rest of Africa, Vusumzi, not Ethiopia. However, maybe the emperor will make him a ras. They laughed. The gathering seemed to exhale at the same time. All of a sudden, music could be heard. The knots of people disbanded. Vuz, Joe, and Jara walked away together, and the man who had been the object of Vuss's tirade disappeared. Only Kebby, Bandy, who had been standing behind her husband, and I were left in the middle of the floor. Kebby looked at us, lifted her eyebrows, and gave a tiny shrug of her frail shoulders. Bandy put her hands on her hips and grinned roguishly. I thought of us as foot soldiers, bringing up the rear in a war whose declaration we had not known, left on the battlefield after a peace was achieved in which we had not participated. I laughed out loud. Bandy and Kebby chuckled. We moved nearer and, smiling, touched each other's shoulders, arms, hands, and cheeks. Brought to friendship by the first man and by the clever, humorous mediation of the third man, we three women were to be inseparable for the next year and a half. I never learned what fuse ignited the conflagration. At home, Vuz answered my query. He was wrong and too cowardly to say what he meant. Did he insult you? I mean us, the race? Not directly. Like most white racists, he was paternalistic. I would have preferred he slapped me than that he talked down upon me. Then I could retaliate in kind. I totally agreed. Some whites in black company, beset by the contradiction between long-learned racism and the demands of courtesy, confusedly offend listening blacks. The stereotypical. Some of my best friends and other awkward attempts at what they think to be civility elicit from black people an outburst of anger whites can neither comprehend nor avoid. An inability to speak fluent Arabic and the difference in cultures made friendships with Egyptian women difficult. The secretaries in my office were neither brave enough, I understood that as a 6-foot-tall black American female editor. I was somewhat of an oddity, nor had the time many had taken jobs to help their needy parents and siblings, nor were interested enough some were already betrothed and were working to pay for their trucees to respond to my friendly overtures. I had heard of Hanifa Fathi and noted the respect with which her name was spoken. Hanifa Fathi, the poet. Then Hanifa, wife of a judge. It was unusual to hear an Egyptian woman's marital alliance not reported as her first accomplishment. When we finally met at a conference, I was surprised to find her pretty. I had never heard her looks described. She wore her light brown hair long in the manner of Lauren Bacall, and her strong feminine features reminded me of the bold American actress. When we shook hands, her handshake was firm. She said she had been reading my work in the Arab Observer and was determined that we should meet. I accepted her invitation to meet some Egyptian female writers, scholars, and teachers. In Hanifa's modish living room, I met Egyptian women who had earned doctorates from European universities and serious painters and talented actresses, but I found them too trained, too professionally fixed to welcome the chummy contact of friendship. Hanifa, however, was warm and witty. We spent gossipy Saturday afternoons on the veranda of the Cairo Country Club. My marriage had shape, responsibility, and no romance, and although I was working 10 hours a day at the Arab Observer, my salary slipped away like sand in an hourglass. There was never enough. Vuz needed more clothes, more trips, more parties. Guy needed more clothes and more allowance. I needed more of everything, or at least I wanted an increase of the things I had and the possession of things I had never owned. On the face of it, things looked bad, but I couldn't escape from a cheeriness which sat in my lap, lounged on my shoulders, and spread itself in the palms of my hands. I was, after all, living in Cairo, Egypt, working, paying my own way. My son was well. Then there were David Du Bois, Bandy, Kebby, and Hanifa. I had the possibility of a brother and 3 sisters. It could have been much worse. Bandy gave a hilarious party to which only women were invited. The occasion was a celebration of the birthday of a great Liberian female doctor. Elaborate food and a variety of drinks were served by uniformed attendants. The living room was decorated as if for a supreme embassy function, and a trio of musicians played familiar melodies. Wives and secretaries from the African embassies and a sprinkling of Egyptian women, and I felt deliciously important. We ate, talked, drank, and half the invitees finally danced, moving individually across Bandy's polished hardwood floor. Each woman observed the steps of her own country. Kebby, with her hands on her hips, slid her feet in tiny patterns, meanwhile raising first one shoulder, then the other, and rotating the shoulders in sensuous undulation. Banty and Mrs. Cleland from the Ghanaian embassy danced high life, stepping lightly, with knees slightly bent, pushing their backsides a little to the left, a little to the right, and directly behind themselves. I combined some twists with the swim and received approving laughter and applause from the non-dancers who sat on the sidelines. The party was nearing its end when a young woman took the floor. She wore West African national dress. The long printed skirt and matching blouse hugged a startling body. She had wide shoulders, large erect breasts, billowing hips, and the waist of a child. All the dancers backed away and found seats as the beautiful woman moved to the music. She swiveled and flourished, jostled and vibrated, accompanied by the audience's encouragement and laughter. Swing it, girl. Swing it. Show that thing, child. Show it. Who? She made her face sly, knowing Randy, and her large hips uttered as if a bird, imprisoned in her pelvis, was attempting flight. The viewer's delight reminded me of the pleasure older black American women found in other women's sexiness. Years before, when I had been a shake dancer, some ladies used to pat my hips and exclaim, "You've got it, baby. Shake it. Now, shake it." Their elation was pure, sensual, and approving. If they were old, they looked on female sensuality as an extension of their own and were reminded of their youth. Younger women recollected the effects of their last love-making or were prompted by womanish sexuality into pleasant anticipation of their next satisfying encounter. I was tickled that African women and black American women had the custom in common. When the music and dancing were finished, I joined the women who crowded around the dancer, patting, stroking her, and laughing. I am from northern Nigeria. Her voice was soft, and she kept her eyes lowered, respecting the age and positions of the older women. I am an unmarried girl with a good dowry. I'm here to stay with Egyptian friends and study Arabic. Her name was Mendina, and she was obviously looking for a husband. We complimented her on her beauty and welcomed her to Cairo, and I secretly wished her luck.
And now, Maya Angelou for Butterfinger.
The wind, the rain, the fire, the Butterfinger. Did the caveman know your delicious goodness? Did the Mayan priest exult in your buttery crunchiness? Did the slothful mastodon upon his extinction declare, "Don't lay a finger on my Butterfinger"? Oh, you finger of butter, you proud confection, sugar, ground roasted peanuts, fructose, glucose, sucrose, lactose, partially hydrogenated palm kernel oil, crispity, crunchity, peanut buttery, I give myself to you, Butterfinger. Glad mantle of golden chocolatey hope upon my breast.
This has been Maya Angelou for Butterfinger.
David Allen Greer, Katherine Massey Book Club. See there? See there? See, even that. They got so many shiftless, worthless, sexist, patriarchal black dudes to play Dr. Maya Angelou. I struggle to keep up with them all. So you heard David Allen Greer, Tracy Morgan, got a white woman, and I even have to go back in the recesses because we heard one other black male. I have to go back and see who the entire menagerie of black males that they have had to play Dr. Maya Angelou and anybody else on Saturday Night Live over all of these years. Even that, WTH. WTH. Who was sitting there like, yes, David. And David Allen Greer, who was in Boomerang, yes. His black father wrote a book about racism. And I think it's something like Black Rage or something. Let me see what his father's name is. So William H. Greer, like he, I think, was like a psychologist or something. Let me see what, that's it. Did I get the book? Black Rage, Gus T, man, come on. So the book is Black Rage. Two black psychiatrists reveal the full dimensions of the inner conflicts and the desperation of black life in the United States. William H. Greer, Price M. Cobbs. That is the father, co-author of this book, of David Allen Greer. What is his dad, if he was still alive at that time, what does his dad say to write this book? My son, in a dress, mocking Dr. Maya Angelou, and especially if he ever heard Neely Fuller Jr., ooh-ee. From the franchise that brought us buckwheat. 50 years, indeed. And Chris Rock. And Chris Rock. Woo! Anyway, let's see. The number 605-313-5164. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Let's see. Folks who dialed in. We have Miss Totally, Octavius in New York. Do you have commentary? Should be with us, sir.
Yes. Greetings, Gus. Greetings, callers and listeners. One of the first things I noticed from chapter 17 I really did appreciate was the time that she took to work on her craft. Being new to it, obviously, I really think it's noticeable. It's something that should get some respect to, a head nod, because taking time out to do the research to kind of perfect this craft that she's just now adopting is something that is, we lack. I think we need to do that more often, and to take time out to become the best we can on something that we're getting into and we're starting to delve in. Guy, though, her son, I just every time I read about him, I just don't. It's just sad. Like he's just a sad black boy to me. Like I and then we keep hearing, I'm a man, and this, and it's just like, nah, you just, and I don't completely blame him. He's in a certain of voices of white supremacy. It's very difficult for him to mature and to seek his own path to manhood to some degree, and it's very difficult when there's no stability in your household, and it's no disrespect to Dr. Maya Angelou, but it's just, it must be extremely frustrating for him, because there's no space that he could just develop and grow, because as we know, children do need stability, and part of that stability is being in a stable household, and it just doesn't look like he ever had that. So I don't know, man. These sections, every time I'm just like, oh, I have two sons, and I cringe at some of the things that I'm like listening to while I'm reading some of it. The metaphors, like there was one where she was speaking, I believe, on the surface, we seem to have nothing in common save our gender and blackness. Kibbage, I hope I'm saying it right, I'm probably butchering it, pardon me, was thin, small, married to a son of a royal Selassie house. She was as beautiful as an antique gold, and as reserved as a vault and length credence to the common African saying that the loveliest women on the continent were to be found in Ethiopia. I don't like metaphors referring to people as objects most of the time. Especially something like gold, for that matter. Not really a fan of that, but I get where she's trying to go with it. Situation between Joe and Voss. I kind of wanted to see some action there, but I guess it was for the better, considering the situation. I want to reread that section because I feel like I kind of got a sort of a picture of it, but I want to get a better, clear picture before I make any real commentary. And this section, in Hanifa's modish living room, I met Egyptian women who had earned doctorines from European universities and serious painters and talented actresses, but I found them too trained, too professionally fixed to welcome the chummy contact of friendship. Interesting. I wonder why. Was it a scenario where they were, a Carter G. Woodson situation where she was dealing with quote-unquote miseducated Negroes? Was that the scenario, or was it just her being offset and just going, nah, this is just not my space? That was a little strange. This last metaphor I did like was interesting. There was a lady dancing. She made her face sly, knowing Randy, and her large hips fluttered as if a bird imprisoned in her pelvis was attempting flight. I think using the term imprisoned was interesting in that scenario. Yeah, that's all I have for now. I'll close out and mute my line. Thank you.
What exactly, before you depart us, Octavius, in New York, metaphors, hey, dear to my heart, what exactly strikes you as sad about Guy? Like, he's not industrious, he's out participating in SANE, the youth group that's against nuclear armament, and trying to help. He gets a job to help, get money for his mom. Apparently he's doing really well academically once he gets to Egypt. Like, what strikes you as consistently sad about Guy?
I just don't get I don't get anything from the book, I don't get any information from the book that he's been allowed to be just a kid, a child. It just seems like he's been, and I've heard this before, and I believe other professors like Dr. T.S. Johnson has mentioned this, as well as others, where there are spaces where black boys grow up in households with single-parent mothers, and the boy, tries to become, or feels like he has to become, the man of the house, so to speak. Trust me, I tip my hat to the things he's doing. I just like so much work, and to me, he's just never a kid. I don't really read anything like that. Like, from the jump, even in his teenage years, they've just been constantly like, on the go with no stability. It's not bad, but I don't know if I'd want all that for my child right away. I want them to live a little bit in some environment that's stable. And I hope that makes sense.
That makes sense. He was in the commune with the white people in San Francisco, and out in Beverly Hills, and out riding camels in Africa. Like, this is not exactly Devante, but yes, that does make sense. Incidentally, I've seen Maya Angelou, and I've seen interviews, and there are videos with these interviews, not with Terry Gross, but with Mr. Grant, the interview that we heard today. They have video with that, so I've seen what Dr. Angelou looks like throughout her life. That is not the case with her son, Guy Johnson, who is kind of a major part of this book. Just seeing him reminds me, like, oh yeah, he has a white dad, right? He is really pale. That's not a critique or anything, but he is substantially lighter than Dr. Angelou, like way lighter. He's looks like a little bit lighter than President Obama, if I had to pick someone that we've probably seen. Even that, I have no idea. Now, how does that factor into the brawl with the savages? And, yeah, that's just significant. Everything that we've heard about black complexion, skin tone, and all the rest of it, like, he does have a white parent, I believe, and he is rather pale, and that might factor into a lot about even all this insistence of manhood, which is very common even for black people who do have two black parents, but he does have a white parent. He's very pale. Let's see.
Yeah. And can I ask you something on that, guy? Well, do you think that actually helps him navigate more because he is lighter? I think so.
Helps him how?
Navigating. So I think black males of darker hue tend to, and this is not something I'm just making up, but this is something that they've studied, which is white people tend to react very different towards black males with darker hue. They may be a bit more offsetting and more, agitated by that, but as opposed to black men and black women, lighter skin shade, and I'm saying that, or lighter hue, and I'm saying that as, from everything from what we see on, television to advertisements in magazines, what they portray. And I think in those times, as Dr. Francis Carlson would say, it's like, if you're yellow, you're mellow, you're brown, stick around, black, get in the back. I think that helps him a little bit navigating through certain spaces. That's just what I think. I wonder if you see that same process in this as well.
Fascinating. Hey, that is what Dr. Angelou says, and Norm Stamper did tell us, the bigger you are, the darker you are as a black male, the greater of a threat you are seen as, and we got to get the nigger knocker and go upside your head. So, and we've heard that from lots of, different sources. Darker you are, the worse it's going to be. So, yeah, and like I said, I wouldn't even have known that because the book that we're reading doesn't have pictures, at least not my version, and I've not seen God. Like, I'd really only seen a quick snapshot, and I think even some of those pictures, they were not in color. So it took me, after you said that, to kind of look so I could see some more pictures of him, like, oh, wow, he's kind of pale. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear some of his commentary, particularly once he got older, to read this book and all of it. He's going to go battle the savages and the day camp situation and all of it, man, all that commentary about sexual attraction between guy and she. Like, it would be very interesting because he's such a big part of the book. What are his thoughts about all that, all these years on, God Johnson? And yeah, the skin complexion, that would be curious too. That would be curious, if he talks. Anyway, let's see. Much obliged, Octavius in New York. That's interesting that she didn't really comment on that, because she does know that the skin complexion thing is, pretty important under the conditions of white supremacy. Our listener, finishing up email 1, chapter 17. I learned from Abdul Hassan how to write an opinionated article with such subtlety that the reader would think the opinion his own. Eric Nims, the layout artist, showed me that an article was placed on a page, its typeface, even color of ink were as important as the best written copy. Toni Morrison was also an editor, which may have been important also in developing her writing skills. Article detailing Maya Angelou's journalism career. The Caged Bird Sings of Freedom, Maya Angelou's anti-colonialism journalism in the United Arab Republic and Ghana. How about that? Let's see. 2. Although the romance in our marriage had evaporated, I still admired and appreciated him. I even loved him. I simply was not in love with him. Not sure how she distinguishes loved from not in love, or even how she defines love. You know what it means, acting crazy, Leroy, because I have heard people say that before. I love him or her. I'm not in love with him. And the role was, that's right, girl. I know exactly. Yep. And everybody, I have no idea, because we start with love means, and then we'll see the rest of it. Now again, hey, Fuller said, replace white supremacy with justice. The worthless Negro Gus T said, nothing wrong with that, Fuller. Perfect. I just said from time to time, and hey, Fuller said love and justice, same thing. I just said from time to time, replace white supremacy with love, just to remind people We don't have all that love. You didn't fall in love and in love and love. All that has been nullified by the system of white supremacy racism. So if we want to get back to loving, replace white supremacy first. That's the mission. 3. Vu's face, however, was alive with contempt, and his right arm was raised. He was poking the white man's chest with his forefinger. Vu's was intoxicated with either alcohol or rage. I would have preferred he slapped me than he talked down upon me. Then I could retaliate in kind. The stereotypic some of my best friends elicit from black people an outburst of anger whites can neither comprehend nor avoid. I have learned from the Cow's broadcast that we is imperative that we maintain control of our emotions when dealing with racist white supremacists. Whites do comprehend what they are doing. They are so skilled in pressing our buttons. Talk about it. And again, now see, again, all of this, the stereotypic some of my best friends elicit from black people an outburst of anger whites can neither comprehend. They're ignorant again. How is it, regardless of the scenario, when a white person practices white supremacy racism, it is chalked up to ignorance and incompetence on the white person's part? How is that? And after all this time, even when this book, even the events where she's talking about in the 1960s, you got like centuries of white supremacy racism, at least at that point, if not more. How is that ignorance? And all over the world, all areas of people activity. How is that ignorance? And some of this is so tacky. They've been saying the same thing. You know, I got 3 or 4 white. They said that this week. They said this for Negro History Month. I just told you the repulsive talk 2 days ago where they said black culture is fried chicken, afros, which is kind of repeated in this book. It begins and ends with fried chicken and the afros in between. But in the midst of all of that, it was the same thing. White people don't have to think about racism. White people are ignorant. They just don't comprehend all of this. They don't have to think about it. How is that just gets repeated? And I have a black friend. How does that get repeated for all these years? And then, here we go. And then I have to explain to you. Like, come on now. Come on. I had to explain this to your grandfather and your great-grandfather. Like, wait a minute. And all over the world, too. Like, nope. We got to come to a better understanding, a more accurate understanding about why this keeps happening. It ain't white ignorance, white incompetence, none of that. 4. I had heard of Hanifa Fathi and noted the respect with which her name was spoken. Hanifa Fathi, the poet, could not find anything about this woman. 5. Young woman wore West African national dress, matching blouse, hugged a startling body. She had wide shoulders, large erect breasts, billowing hips, and the waist of a child. I am from northern Nigeria. I am an unmarried girl with a good dowry. I am here to stay with Egyptian friends and study Arabic. Her name was Menadina, and she was obviously looking for a husband. She was clearly on a mission, presumably for a wealthy Egyptian suitor. According to a 1974 UNESCO symposium discussing the question of whether Egyptians are classified as white or black, the consensus is that they are mixed race, whatever that means. I wonder if suspected racists would be so concerned about their racial classification if they're not those pyramids. Hada Code KOTB of the Today Show on TV identifies as Egyptian. How did they have a whole symposium on the race? Come on, man. Who does the deciding? The people classified as white. Now that doesn't even. Now come on, that's the same thing. You're talking about a geographic location. Like, are Mexicans classified as white? What kind of nonsense is that? Alaskans classified as white? South Africans classified as white? Canadians classified as white? Like, come on, man. Y'all have been ignorant. What country is white? Stop being stupid, man. Stop being stupid. What does it see? What does it mean to be white, man? See? White people do the classifying and they do the confusing. Let's see. Other folks who dialed in, much obliged. Our callers, other emails, untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see. Lauren, commentary should be with us. We'll nab other hands as we proceed.
Evening again. I didn't have that much for that section. Just there was one part after Booth has the confrontation with the white man at the party. It said Jara, taking his cue from Booth's relaxation, said, "Speak for the rest of Africa, Basumzi, not Ethiopia. However, maybe the emperor will make him a Ras." They laughed. That word, Ras, I wasn't sure what it meant. The only other time I had seen it was in Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, that character, Ross the Destroyer, Ross the Exhorter. But I looked it up. It says, well, according to Google, it says it means prince in Ethiopian language. So I just thought I'd point that out in case anyone else, I don't know, had the same thought with that term. And earlier, Gus, when you were talking, you made comments after the first session. The section that said, "First half-heartedly informed by the knowledge that we were airing melodies written by the last large group of people enslaved on the planet." You think it's possible she just meant black people and not black people from the area of the world called the United States? Gus?
It seems pretty specific to the songs that she was singing about the black people born here in the U.S. Like, it seems very specific, unless I'm, misreading, which is super possible, but it seems very much like she's talking about these songs that they're harming, that the black people can pick up on, that these songs came from that specific group of black people. That's what I think she's talking about. I don't think she means black people in total. I think she means specifically the black people here in the U.S.
Okay. That's all I had. Thanks for allowing me to speak.
Did you think she meant black people in total or something else?
I don't know. I kind of didn't even think about it until you started talking about it. That's why I formed the question. I'm not sure.
Oh. I don't know. Other folks can, maybe reread it and see what you think. I'll give out the page number if they want to go back and ponder on it as we wrap up next week. Even have time to think about it as we get ready to wrap up for next week. See, much obliged, Lauren. Oh, there we go. It's on page, or it's right at the end of chapter 15. So the page I was going to do the page, but since I have the e-copy, I will not do the page, and it's unnecessary. So all you have to do, find chapter 16, right? Wherever that is, on whatever version you have, even if you get the audio book, right? So you find what the audio book is abridged, so maybe not the audio book. Whatever version you have, find chapter 16, and then just go find the last chapter of 15, and you'll be right there. It's right there it's like one of the last 2 or 3 sentences about the last large group of people enslaved on the planet. Yeah, we were airing melodies written by the last large group of people enslaved. Yeah, I think she's talking about black people in the U.S. specifically. This is not all the melodies of all of us dark people on the continent. I think she's specifically talking about I already said that. Anyway, last chapter 15, you can go check it out and let us know. Or you can write untiljustice@gmail.com, or you can let us know for next week when we get ready to wrap up if you think on it, what you think. They might even have a study guide, right? Because a million people, they said, read this for Oprah's book club in the 90s, after OJ, no less. See what they might, have had like a study group or something. Let's see if they read that portion and what they thought, or if there's at least a study guide that talks about that and, breaks down that little section of the text. Any hoodles, let's see. I'll get some of my notes for chapter 17, and we will get ready to ride, and then we'll wrap the whole thing up for next Thursday. Wacky. Got to it Thursday. Well, yeah, relatively fast, I guess. Anywho. Okay, chapter 17. She says she stayed at the Arab Observer for over a year, and gradually my ignorance receded. I learned from Abdul Hassan how to write an opinionated article. Well, we got that part. That right there I thought was so, and we talked about that, like, hey, she says, I didn't know a lot about this. I wasn't an expert. I didn't have experience in this specific type of journalism in this part of the world, covering this region. But it's what Fuller say, I'm still learning. She didn't go home and get lazy. She said, I'm going to work. I'm going to go and figure out and learn and do as much as I can so I can be successful. Now, she was motivated to not get evicted, right on, but I'm going to do as best I can. Bravo again. Let's see. She said about all, it seems like this so-called romance fell apart so fast, and that is so common in the system of white supremacy racism. Like, they hook up when she was still with Thomas, right, the bail bondsman, and they hook up, and then she ends up all the way on the other side of the world, not enough questions asked, they get married, and then just like that, this all over with. Like, dang, the first argument, the first bit of conflict, and yeah, you're cheating and messing around. I mean, if it's that flimsy, why go through this whole charade of getting married? And that seems like a lot of what all this is anyway. It's just a big charade. I'm pretending to be a man and pretending to have this big fancy house and pretending to be married and pretend, and it's just a charade. She even said that she had these fantasies and it's going to be exciting. Like, what? You don't even have an address. Like, that, and that is a man. What's the line she said from the UN? That is black people half shaved and grinning. I think it was Lauren. She said, I don't even know if that's a metaphor. Like, they might have for real meant that Leroy went shaved and came out like, whoo, that is through. I mean, what can you say? You ended up where? On what continent? And you don't even have an address? You not even half shaven, man. You got like, woo, man. Let's see. The love them, we got that part of it. Great. I think Octavius in New York had said that part about the metaphors and comparing people to objects, even gold. Great point. And especially Dr. Angelou, she was so verbose and intelligent and skilled with words. She showed throughout her life. She lived, relatively long as well. Like, yes, we can do better than comparing people to objects, for sure. Race soldiers do lots of that. Lots and lots of that. Let's see. That is very common saying, though, that black females in Ethiopian, born in Ethiopia, are very, very lovely. Very commonly said. Let's see. I think Mr. Fuller has in the word guide Middle East after verify, but I'm very sure he has that as a word caution, maybe not use, and then bright to suggest that someone is intelligent. Middle class is in there as well. It's a lot of time. Fuller talked about that. If we had just, and again, Dr. Angelou, they're contemporary. She was born 1 year before Mr. Fuller, and then he lived that much longer. That if non-white people had just been a little bit more codified with our words, definitions, what does it mean to be white, we would have made, he didn't just say we would have made more progress. He says we would have solved this problem. Words are that important, being precise, that important. Let's see. When she talks about, even that gave me pause, when Dr. Angelou talks about she had difficulty kicking it, being chummy, as she said, with these Egyptians. Are these white people or non? And that would be like I said with Guy. What's the skin complexion of these people? Do they look like they could be classified as white? Because she said they had doctorate degrees. Now, she already said that she felt worthless. She did not at that. She was not Dr. Angelou at that time. She was Maya Angelou. If you are a black female victim of rape, you're on the other side of the world, could be evicted at any moment, and you're talking to people who could be race soldiers, and they got a PhD. Yeah, they might be pretty snooty, and I don't want to. And even if they are non-white, non-black people, it might just be anti-blackness and whatever. Nigga woman, what's your name? Maya, Muya, Macha, whatever. Get out of here. Like, we know that black, get that. That for reals could have been what it was. I'd have to see. Let's see. Oh, and we even got it again. Now, when this kerfuffle happens with Vuz, and this white fella, race soldier, whatever conversation that, and whoa, before we even get to that, she said, Vuz, he might have been intoxicated with corn liquor, rage, or both. Yours truly has said, for over a decade, one of the worst combinations in the known universe: whites, alcohol. If white people are going to be present, this is business. Put the liquor up. We are on business. Asking questions. I'm expecting a white man is here. Dogs bark. Birds chirp. White people ain't ignorant about no racism. Put that liquor up. This is not time for corn liquor. Mistake number one. Now you're going to be intoxicated? Like, oh my God, you're asking for all kinds of no codification at all. And what I say is Saturday night, I'm black and I'm dangerous, case in point. And I said generally to black people, but now you actually, but this would end up being dangerous for other black people because you get up in a white man's face, which is I think why they intervened. Like, ooh-wee, this could be bad for all of the dark people present. Get your act together. And even within all that, she writes, a foolish, small-minded, greedy nation, you are mean and stupid. Stupid. He had to say it twice. This is what Vuz is saying to this white man. White people who practice racism are not stupid. They jacked up your whole continent, man. You can't pay your rent because of these stupid white people. You can't pay your rent on 2 continents because of these stupid white people. They took your whole continent. You can't go nowhere. South Africa to Egypt, Cairo to Cape Town. They took your whole continent. If they're stupid, what are you? In this Black History Month. Come on, man. Come on, man. And that's painfully stubborn thinking as well. Ignorant white people. Like, come on, man. Come on. I just read that. Fuller talked about that relentlessly. Like, come on, man. Now, that is as goofy as it comes. Ignorant white people. Come on. Let's see. And even I met Egyptian women who had earned doctorates from European universities. I don't think they could have been too dark if they were going to be allowed to go to Oxford or whichever other European universities. These have to be some relatively pale females. That alone might account for why this was not too chummy. We're not going to be too cool. Like, black guy, I don't care. She could have been Dr. Angelou, and it's still where oh, you graduated, let's say she graduated from Harvard or whatever Ivy League so-called school. Oh, you got Harvard. You see how they treat Obeezy, right? Obama, he has a white parent and a Harvard degree. How chummy are white people with him? Let's see. Hey, how chummy are a lot of black people with Obeezy? Because these might not be white people. I thought they rioted when Obeezy went to the continent in some place. They were upset. Like, get out of here. We don't get out of here, pretend black person. Let's see. This portion right here, I guess this will be my last comment, and then we can ride for next week. She says, the viewer's delight reminded me of the pleasure older black American women found in other women's sexiness. Younger women recollected the effects of their last lovemaking or were prompted by womanish sexuality into pleasant anticipation of their next satisfying encounter. I was tickled that African women and black American women had the custom in common. This reminded me of fried chicken and afros. I don't never hear nothing that is black. Neely Fuller Jr. I said a few weeks back, I said black culture. Neely Fuller Jr. said black culture is, I'm gonna get me some stuff tonight. I was tickled that African women and black American women had the custom in common. What custom is that? Rosa Parks and Winnie Mandela striving to replace white supremacy with justice. I'm not going to be pushed around and beaten on by no black dude or nobody else. I'm going to be universal woman. No. Sexiness. Victims guaranteed qualified, but I mean, shake your money maker and all that. I mean, we got all that. Gyrating, twerking, we've had a lot of that. System of white supremacy racism. I do not think we need black culture to be anything other than replace white supremacy with justice. That's black culture. We don't need fried chicken, gyrating, cornrows, kente cloth. None of that. None of that. None of that. All we need is replace white supremacy with justice. That is black culture. Anyway, we will wrap it all up next week. It has been a hoot of a read for a book I'd never heard of. You all can let us know that next week as well. Go rifle through mommy's bookshelf. You have black grandmothers, black siblings, black aunties. Like I said, the assumption is that your black male relatives are ignorant, rapists, illiterate, and that they did not read this. So they all, of course they didn't. We just want to see, do you black females, did they read this book? Did they have this book? Did they even know about this book? Were they a part of the Oprah book club way back then, if they were alive? Or, did they find this along the way in their studies, academic career and such? Let us know before we wrap up the book next week. I'm just curious. My wager would be you probably got lots of white chicks who are aware of this book, not black people. That would just be my guess, but we'll see. Much obliged for the folks who wrote in, called Hopefully Worthy of Your Time and Energy. We'll be here tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Matter of fact, tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday, I think even Monday too, every day we'll get in some appreciation and gratitude for Fuller along the way. Wacky things like, I'm gonna get me some stuff tonight. Negro culture. It shouldn't be, but 1965 to 2025 for sure. Not for all of us, but for way too many of the people classified as black. Negro culture is I'm gonna get me some stuff tonight. That's why Boo said Saturday night. I'm black and I'm dangerous. He didn't say I'm black and I'm constructive. I'm black and I'm courteous. I'm black and I'm just. I'm black and I'm dangerous. Whether or not I get my stuff, I'm dangerous. You better believe it. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. Absolutely. Protect that brain computer. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient under conditions of white supremacy. We ask that you help us demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately for Neely Fuller Jr. I said the next 30 days, at least till March 5. At least till March 5. No name calling black people. That's asking a lot. I know. No gossiping. No throwaway offspring. Cal signing out. Still learning. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. No problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.